members of the public. My name is Kelly Williams, and I'm the Commissioner of Public Works. Thank you for your time this afternoon to review and discuss the Public Works Water Sewer Stormwater Fund budget. We appreciate the opportunity. Sitting next to me is Vince Crocchia, the Deputy Commissioner of Public Works, and Chris O, the Director of Water. I'd also like to recognize Assistant Tina Romano Austin. I also like to point out that we have the Director of Finance here, Brett Taylor, for any finance-related questions. Again, thank you for your time this afternoon, and I will pass it over to Vince.
Thank you.
First, I'm going to give an overview of the Department of Public Works. The mission of the department is to operate and maintain critical infrastructure and facilities, provide superior services for our customers, and to promote resiliency, in addition to providing services vital to city constituents such as waste collection, street cleaning, snow removal, street paving, sidewalk replacement, traffic controls, constituent call center, and much more. The department also operates an entire water, wastewater, stormwater utility, which is the budget we're here to talk about tonight. Our utility consists of 108,000 customers, both inside and outside the city. There are 2 water treatment plants that produce an average of 16 million gallons a day of drinking water, 420 miles of water transmission and distribution mains, and 370 miles of sewer and stormwater mains. The wastewater treatment plant is a regional facility servicing residents and businesses north of the C&D Canal and a small piece of southeastern Pennsylvania, including approximately 600,000 customers. Our stormwater management program captures more than 80% of stormwater runoff within the city. Next slide, please. Okay, the vision for the department is to maintain our utility and resources to meet evolving regulatory requirements, water supply needs, and customer expectations into the future. Priorities for fiscal 26 for Water Sewer Fund are to provide customers with safe, reliable water, wastewater, and stormwater mitigation services, and continue 100% compliance with the regulatory requirements. Also to implement stormwater mitigation projects focusing on areas with reoccurring flooding issues, proactive identification and replacement of potential lead service lines, and to comply with the forthcoming regulations from EPA Office of Drinking Water, which include preparing for compliance with the EPA PFAS regulations and also creating a service line inventory and replacement plan under the lead and copper revised rule, and as well as maintaining a standard of exceptional integrity, honor, and respect through open communications and accessibility. Next slide, please. Performance measures for the department, for the utility, include the number of non-compliance events that must be reported to a state or federal agency, such as a CSO overflow, NIPD's permit violations, boil water advisories, or Safe Drinking Water Act violations. The next would be the length of time a customer is without water measured in hours, and the last, the number of water quality complaints that we receive.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Vincent and also Commissioner Williams. So at this time, we're going to jump right into our questions. I will start with number 1 under Water Sewer Fund. Understanding the city has the responsibility to ensure that indirect costs adequately reflects the best usage for services that are aligned with the Water Sewer Fund. Can you please justify the $8.5 million Water Sewer Fund budgeted citywide for indirect costs, yet while realizing that FY2026 proposed water and sewer rate increase of 6.5 and stormwater for 6%? Please explain, and you can just answer A through C.
Sure. All right. So A through C will be in follow-up. Indirect cost, the comprehensive indirect cost allocation studies are commonly performed once every 5 years or so, and or whenever there is a material departmental change within a municipal government's organizational structure. The comprehensive study helps define an allocation plan, which is then used by municipalities to update and to allocate indirect cost budgets to the enterprise fund departments. OMB uses its indirect cost allocation plan to first determine the O&M indirect cost budget allocation for each division of the 421 Water Sewer Fund. Then the water, sewer, and stormwater O&M costs inclusive of the indirect cost along with other revenue requirements such as capital costs and reserves determine the level of annual rate increases that are needed. Therefore, while the O&M indirect cost allocated each year to the water, sewer, stormwater utilities are an integral part of the total water sewer fund cost increases, the magnitude of the allocated indirect cost increase could be higher or lower than the annual water, sewer, and stormwater rate increases. The indirect cost allocation, also referred as pricing of internal services, is a governmental best practice that is adopted widely in the public sector where an internal service fund and/or general fund provides services to an enterprise fund. Therefore, the operating budgets of the water sewer utilities include indirect costs. Attached are a couple of resources in the hyperlinks below that would provide additional overview of government best practices for determining and allocating indirect costs to enterprise fund departments.
Thank you. We're going to move right into question number 2. Can you please discuss any grant funds and rate stabilization funds utilized to mitigate the proposed 6.5 water, sewer, and 6% stormwater rate increase?
Sure. Okay, so with grant funds and principal forgiveness through the SRF program, we've received $52 million in SRF funds with principal forgiveness. This also includes $14 million in lead and PFAS loans that are due to close in fiscal 26. These are all allocated towards active projects. We received $13 million in EPA community grants. Again, these are active projects, and $9 million in grants from various sources that are active. Next slide, please.
Go ahead. Continue, please.
Okay. As far as grants from congressionally directed spending, we've received 4 over the last couple of years. South Wilmington Sewer infrastructure expansion for $4.8 million. Prices Run Interceptor Rehab and CSO 4A, $3.06 million. That project's actually been completed at this point. And the South Wilmington Sewer separation for B and C Street, $4 million and $6 million respectively. And that project is in progress right now.
Okay, all right, thank you. I would like to acknowledge Councilmember Field, and we're going to go to question number 3. Okay, so with the evolving changes regarding federal funding, while understanding possible legal challenges, can you please share if any potential budgetary or fiscal contingencies for this upcoming budget and or any potential operational changes considering the federal funds that the city receives for the day-to-day operation of the city that may possibly result in being on the chopping block?
And so as far as federal funding, Public Works has not added any contingency funds to the FY2026 operating budget. The SRF funding with principal forgiveness has not been affected to date. The SRF funds come through the state of Delaware. The congressionally directed spending is contingent upon Congress passing a bill with appropriations for this funding. The funding award for $8 million that was expected in FY25 for work on the CSO 30 stormwater improvements was not approved by Congress and has been resubmitted for FY26. What we do for larger federal grants to minimize the risk to the city, the funds are drawn down as soon as invoices are approved by project managers, and reimbursed funds are typically received by the city within a number of days. Construction progress is evaluated to determine optimal stop points in the event that funding is retracted. For smaller federal grants, we would either cover those within our existing budget or scope of projects would be reduced.
Thank you. We'll move right on to question number 4. Considering that the federal government and the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, is regulating PFAS, which is inclusive of setting drinking water standards, can you please share if any federal funding and or budgetary funding set aside to assist with any of these mandates? Please specify plans for the pending EPA and PFAS regulations for the water treatment plants and WWTP.
All right, so as far as PFAS funding, we've received over 13 million in SRF loans dedicated specifically to PFAS, 10 million of which was principal forgiveness. We also received a grant for 2.47 million from DHSS. Next slide, please. As it relates to PFAS, while the new standards do not take effect for another 4 years, the City of Wilmington is taking the following proactive actions. We are voluntarily testing our water monthly to gather the best possible data and guide future decision-making and keep our customers informed. We will also participate in all required federal and state testing. We will continue to coordinate and collaborate with the state and federal regulatory agencies regarding ongoing research and rulemaking developments. We have chosen to take part in legal action that seeks to compensate the City of Wilmington for our PFAS-related efforts. We will continue openly communicating about PFAS, and we encourage our customers to contact us with any questions. We're examining strategies to effectively address PFAS compounds through our water treatment process. We are focusing on the two options that our engineers believe are best suited to their findings: ion exchange and granular activated carbon, also known as GAC. We have completed one round of seasonal testing to evaluate the various media and are conducting an evaluation of the ability for an advanced treatment option to be constructed at the plant. Wilmington, like many other utilities, not only need to evaluate the best treatment options for MCL compliance, but also determine how that treatment process can be constructed at our plant.
Okay. All right. Question number 5. Can you please discuss any budgetary funding set aside in this budget for adopting any water conservation measures and other strategies to reduce climate change?
Okay, so on our water conservation rates, the City of Wilmington had approved water conservation rates for residential customers in fiscal 2006, which took place July 1 of 2005. The purpose of such a rate structure is to promote water conservation among City of Wilmington customers. The residential rates are on inclining block rates. They effective July 1 of 2018, the city switched from quarterly to monthly billing. The monthly billing makes it easier to manage payments and household budgets, avoid delinquency, track water usage, and avoid huge bill spikes by identifying leaks faster. Our FY2026 operating budget funds our annual contribution to the Water Resources Agency, WRA. Funds are included for annual water protection subsidy for source water protection activities within the watershed. Public Works leads Resilient Wilmington and continues to work towards multiple sustainability goals. We are purchasing hybrid and EV vehicles as part of our resiliency efforts, and the city has been a member of the Climate Regency since 2012 and engaged in multiple projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay. Number 6, can you please discuss any proposed changes to positions, whether they're new, deleted, etc., and share any vacant positions? And you can answer A, share any vacant positions 1 through 5, and then B, share the number of positions that are split funded between the water, sewer, and the general fund.
Okay, next please. Okay, so on the screen in front of you, you'll see a list. These are the vacant positions, the division that they're vacant within, the date of vacancy, and then the fund code. 2 of them are split funded between water, sewer, and general fund. There are no position changes, as was asked in the question, to any of the water sewer fund positions. Next, please. Okay, we are currently working very closely with Human Resources to fill vacancies as quickly as possible that the Chief of Staff approves. We have been averaging 30 to 35 vacancies due to employee turnover and experienced difficulty in the current labor market attracting and retaining qualified staff due to available salary ranges and residency requirements. One applicant for Forest Program Operations Supervisor turned down the position after being offered due to the city's residency requirement. It was worth noting that when she applied for the position, because the administration's noticed there was no longer a residency requirement at that time. We have not since been able to fill that position. Temp employees are being used where possible to perform some of the job functions, and there are 24 general fund positions that are split funded between the general fund and the water sewer fund. These are mainly administrative staff that work between both funds.
Okay, thank you. Number 7, understanding the wastewater treatment plant is the city's largest asset and the largest expenditure. Can you please discuss the approximately $26 million budgeted in the contracted maintenance account line of $1.2 million over the prior year's budget? And you can answer A through C.
Okay, so contracted maintenance services, complete budget lines, 24.699 million for FY26. The wastewater treatment plant operations and maintenance agreement is a 20-year agreement with Operations Management International. There are various community investments as listed in the bullet points that they have participated in over the last 12 months. And it's also asked about our sewer maintenance budget for pest control. We did budget 15K under the sewer maintenance division for pest control in FY26. Just to note, the increases for this year are contractual. This particular contract is tied to the employment cost index, CPI, and water sewer CPI for its various components. So it goes up every year. A minimum is typically going to be 1.75%. To a max of 3.75%.
Okay. All right. We are going to move right into question number 8. Can you please justify the $5.7 million budgeted in professional fees, which is up $800,000 over the prior year's budget? The consultants, $2.1 million, engineering, $2.8 million, legal, $103,000, temp agency, $555,000, considering the 104.45 full-time employees, while realizing some outside expertise is required. And you can answer letters A through C.
All right, so this is broken up among multiple charts on the next few slides. So this is a list of the consultants that are made up, the years of service with them, the lengths of contract, amounts, and a description of the services, the total for that particular line. Next, please. This is the engineering line, as well as legal and temporary agencies that round out the professional fees line. The bold and highlighted, or bold and italicized, I should say, firm, Product Construction Services, is one of our DBE engineers. We also have other DBEs that work as sub-consultants and sub-engineers to a lot of our other primes.
Okay. That covers all of question 8, A through C. So we're going to go right into question number 9. Can you please discuss the $13 million budget?
I'm sorry, did you go through everything on A? I'm sorry.
A through
Yeah.
C.
By the
to-
DB, I'm sorry.
The DBEs, it was highlighted and bolded in the engineering chart. Second slide.
Yes.
Is it page 31?
All right, thank you, sorry.
You good?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We are going to go right to question number 9.
Highlighted and bolded?
Can you please discuss the $13 million budgeted in the contract maintenance account grouping of $1.8 million over the prior year's budget? I know that you have a chart that you may want to speak to, and if you could answer letters A through C, that would be great for number 9.
Okay. Okay. So this is this chart is broken down for of our contract and maintenance services. A lot of these are essentially contracts that either go out on the street for bid, or professional services, or in things like Newcastle County, or contractual relationships for the upkeep of this building. The amount of each and the scope of services is there. I'm not aware of any of those that are DBs.
Let me ask you a question, Commissioner. Did you skip over a chart? Did you skip over page 32?
Now, that page 30, slide 32 is the question that you.
Yeah, but it was the chart. I was just
Okay.
wondering if you wanted to say something about the chart.
Okay, now this just breaks down the lines for each of the amounts that make up the total.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that we didn't
And then
skip
the second
anything.
parts was if there were any DBEs, specify the number of large meters for placement and testing and the number of main breaks and valve replacements. So if you go to the next slide, please. And the next slide. So here's the chart based on the testing, the water meter testing that we're planning on doing in FY26. To be determined for 5/8 through 1-inch, 2-inch, there's 75, and we test those every 5 years. 3-inch, 15 planned, we test every 3 years. 4-inch, 15 planned, we test those every 2 years. And the 6-inch and larger, 55, which we test every year. The water main breaks and valve replacement are emergency work and are therefore not scheduled. This contract is used for emergency response to leaks and breaks.
Okay, all right, we're going to move right into question number 10. Can you please discuss the planned use of approximately $1.9 million budgeted in petroleum and chemicals account line pertaining to the water treatment at both Porter and Brandywine filter plants?
Okay. All right, so this line is broken up as the following: under petroleum and chemicals, motor vehicle fuels and lubricants for 16K, bulk chemicals at 1.8 million, laboratory supplies for 143,000. Next, please. Our chemical usage at the plants is based on average daily production of 20 million gallons. Chemical usage is being continually optimized and based on production demand. If we experience main breaks or leak that result in higher water production, additional chemical treatment chemicals are required. Usage of water from Hoops Reservoir requires much higher levels of ferric chloride to coagulate, and then this also requires higher dosing of lime to balance pH. If we have heavy rain events, a pollution discharge, or drought conditions, this can require the switch from to Hoops water. Hoops Reservoir is the city's backup source to ensure continuous clean water. Bulk chemical usage is not linear. Water production is higher during spring and summer periods and requires greater chemical usage during the warm months. Our two most frequently used chemicals are ferric chloride and sodium hypochlorite, and these have both increased in price by 93% and 44% respectively since 2022.
Okay, thank you. I would like to acknowledge President Congo and Councilmember Owens. Okay, we're going to move right into question number 11. Can you please discuss the $1.4 million budgeted in the miscellaneous materials, supplies, and parts account grouping, which is up $184,000 over the prior year's budget, and specify if any of the vendors are DBEs and fire hydrants slated for replacement?
Sure. All right, so these charts, there's several. These are, a lot of these are either smaller contracts that we go out for or blanket POs for various things. Amounts are indicated in the charts. This is the first chart. Again, if there are any DBEs, they would be bold and italicized. Next, please. Part 2, again, these are smaller blanket POs that our various water divisions use for their daily work. Next, please. And this rounds out the list, and the number of hydrants that we are scheduling for replacement is 80 for fiscal 26.
Okay. All right. Question number 12. Can you please discuss the $1.4 million budgeted in the equipment and construction and repairs account groupings?
So that group is made up of the following lines: furniture, fixtures, office equipment for 13K, other non-cap equipment for 142K, and computer software non-capital for 129. There are bullet points of each of the items that are covered underneath each of them, various software contracts and items that we purchase. Next, please. Okay, next. Okay, and under the construction and repairs line, we have building supplies for 1,000 for blanket PO, material supplies for roads, which is concrete, blacktop, and the like, for 498,000, and water meter shop supplies, which is for water meters, fire meters, and ERTs, for 335,000.
Okay. Question number 13. Can you please discuss the planned use for $220,000 in the community activities account grouping?
That line is made up of three items. There's the homeowner connection subsidy that we budgeted $60,000, the water protection subsidy at $60,000, and easements for cemeteries under legislation passed previously by council for $100,000.
Okay. Question number 14. Can you please share a high-level overview of the FY 2026 capital projects for $126 million?
So the next the slide on your screen now indicates each of the capital projects is listed in the CIP submitted. They range from 11th Street Pumping Station, annual and major sewer improvements to annual water improvements, improvements at our water treatment facilities, emerging contaminants, which is PFAS, transmission and pressure zone reliability improvements, again, Brandywine plant improvements, improvements to our raw water system, architectural improvements to our buildings, pumping station improvements. There's a new program here to move to automated metering infrastructure for meter reading. And then we also have, rounding out the list, wastewater treatment plant improvements, as well as stormwater drainage management, green infrastructure, and our urban forest management program.
Okay. All right. We're going to move to our last question as it relates to your FY 2026 proposed organization chart. And you can just share whatever you would like to share.
So this is, next please. This is, goes across about 5 different slides because our department is fairly large. The first slide is the directors and the commissioners. We do have one assistant water division director position that's vacant. If they're vacant, they're highlighted in green, and if there are temp employees, it's noted in red. Next, please. This is our water division. You can see we have a few temps that we use and also several vacant positions that are highlighted. Next, please. Our operations division, our sewer maintenance division comes under operations, which is part of the water sewer fund. Next, please. Administrative division, which some of these folks are split funded because they work within water sewer and the general fund. Next, please. Our engineering division, these folks do our construction markout, GIS, engineering records coordination, and so forth in the city engineer's office. Next, please. Just to So you had everything. Here's the transportation department, which is strictly general fund.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner, for answering those questions very thoroughly. And so at this point in time, we're going to put it out to the council members and to the public. Are there any questions from the council members? Council Member Oliver.
Yes, I'm looking at page 53, Water Division, FY 2026. I'm not able to see her name at the top. Just tell me her name.
Can you speak into your...
Yeah, page 53. Page 53.
53?
Water Division, FY 26. I don't see her name at the top. It's real bleary.
I think she's asking for the
Okay,
director's name.
53, page 53. Right there. What's her name at the top?
Christine.
Which one are you looking for, Chris?
Oh,
That's
Chris.
Chris.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. How you doing, Chris? I just can't see your name on here. May I have a follow-up?
Yes.
The follow-up was on the community activities account. When you say communities activities, I mean, I understand the breakdown, but that kind of makes it seem like it's about the community activities account. Why is it in community activities? On page 47.
These three things come under that major category group in the CK report of the budget. So it's the group's called community activities, and accounting makes that determination of where these things go, not I. The community connection subsidy is a subsidy that we've been doing for many years to try to eliminate galvanized and lead services in our system. We'll assist members of the community once they have their service line replaced. If they provide a receipt, we'll reimburse them up to $1,000 of the cost of the job, whichever is less. And the water production subsidy is for source water protection in the watershed where we do projects upstream of our plants to improve and to maintain water quality so we don't have to use as much treatment chemicals at the plants. And the cemetery easement is something that council passed many years ago. There's 4 different cemeteries that we pay the stormwater fees and in exchange we have an easement. So if we want to put any type of stormwater BMPs or use any of the property that's open on those sites, we can do that. We can do so.
Thank you. One last question.
Yes.
I don't know what page I saw it, about the hydrants. Are y'all going to be replacing the new hydrants? Or I know after Hurricane Ida, that was a big thing.
80 of them will be replaced as
There's
part
80
of our
of 'em?
normal replacement plan. Yeah.
How often, I'm sorry, that was part of the question. How often do y'all replace the?
Typically, we're getting 50 to 75 years or more out of hydrants. I have a vendor that goes around on seasonally. We flow test them throughout our entire. We have over 2,700 hydrants, so we flow test them, and then as they start to report problems and hydrants need to be repaired, we look at that. Any areas where we're doing small main replacement as far as capital work, typically any valves or hydrants in those areas are getting replaced as part of those jobs. So these are just one-off replacements versus, if we were replacing main hydrants and valves on a block, these are ones that are just scheduled for single replacement.
Thank you.
Ms. Bass Knight?
Yes, and just a question, Director Carocha, Commissioner, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure that I looked at the chart correctly, because one of the things that is a concern of council that that council is trying to have done is the disparity report, and they're looking at DBEs. So when I go back and I look at question number 8, when it talks about professional fees, so that's 5.7 million. And if I look at question number 9, that roughly has 13 million. And then if I look at question number 11, that has roughly 1.4 million. So it all deals with some type of contracts. When I look at the charts, it was only one item that was highlighted. So we only have one DBE?
There's one that's a prime, but that's not the only DB we use. On a lot of these contracts, they have DB subcontractors, or they, like on our construction contracts, some of the professional services agreements, they all have other like subcontracts or consultants that they use, but they're not the prime holding the contract. What I list here in the budget and in the justification report is who's the prime that we're going to. That one particular contract is a prime. We had another engineering firm that got bought up by a larger firm, so now they're no longer a DB firm.
Okay. Okay. I'm just asking only because when the disparity report is done and it's going to be looking at it, it's looking at a lot of what Public Works is doing, and it's focusing on a lot of the Public Works contracts because that's where our largest contracts is. So I was just surprised just to see just one, but
Council Chair, if I may.
Yes.
We can prepare a list of all of the DB subcontractors that we use and the associated amount of funding they receive.
I think that would be a great idea.
Absolutely.
And can I, Chair?
Yes.
And also for question number 3, with the congressionally direct spending, particularly for fiscal year 25, related to CSO number 30. So understanding that wasn't approved by Congress and it has been resubmitted for fiscal year 2026, is that going to delay any issues with that CSO or?
Yeah, we just won't start the project. I can't start the project till I have funding in place. So we don't have, this wouldn't even be the total amount needed. This would still have to be spaced out over multiple grants and or loans. We've put in, we're exploring all avenues to try to find grant funding for a lot of the projects we do. So when we amass enough funding, we put the project out for bid and execute the project. But it's not preventing us from doing anything, but we're just prioritizing what we're doing. If I was to move forward and borrow existing funds, or funding from capital for this, it's just going to add to debt service. So we're trying to get the grant, what grant funding we can or what congressional directed spending we can get. It just so happened because of the continuing resolution that Congress passed this year that CDS wasn't part of it. So we didn't get anything.
Chair?
Yes.
Yes, so was this like critical? Was this one of your priorities for the CSOs, CSO number 30?
We have multiple,
Gotcha.
there's multiple projects that we look to do. When funding becomes available, we execute them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Owens and then Councilmember Field. Councilmember,
I'm good.
you good? Councilmember Field?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. So I'm concerned about the 6% increase. And so your proposed budget is $85 million, which is up from $81 million in 2025 and is up from $15 million in 2023. And I'm concerned about the constant annual increases, given that people are being squeezed on a lot of other different fee and tax increases. And also looking at, we've talked about this in previous budget hearings, certain other things that, not just in Public Works, but citywide seem not urgent. For example, pretty much every car driven by city employees now is an SUV, which is much more costly than a conventional four-door sedan. It also seems like there's pretty significant salary increases across the board, not just in Public Works, but in most departments. So my question is, so $85 million, if you had went through line by line and had to identify $2 or $3 million in this budget proposal that you could get by without, what would it be?
I'd have to talk with Chris and sit down, and look at that. I mean, there would be things we'd have to prioritize, and there would be, most likely upgrades to plants, structures, buildings, and things like that we would just put off. Of course, then they're going to age, and then we're going to probably have to do more work in capital repairs in the future. A large part of what drives our budget is the capital repairs. You've got a water system with 420 miles of main, 46% of which is over 75 years old. That main needs to be replaced. It's the end of its usable life. You have a wastewater treatment plant that is going to require $125 million worth of repairs over 10 years. So I'm 5 years through that right now. I mean, this is just the reality of the infrastructure. You have to keep, and now we also have EPA coming forward with the revised lead and copper rule, which has me going out on a lead scavenger hunt and digging up the streets, potholing every service, because I have to be able to put an inventory together and have a plan within the next 10 years to replace every bit of lead in the system, even though we didn't have a problem with lead. I've got PFAS, emerging contaminants, coming down the pike. I spoke about this during the last budget. Between our two plants, that's $150 million in a new treatment process that I have to shoehorn in to an existing infrastructure on our grounds that is going to require a lot of coordination and movement of large facilities, all while continuing to maintain water, provide water service and wastewater services to our customers.
Thank you.
I'm not suggesting that you.
Excuse me, you have a follow-up?
Can I
or
follow? Just clarification. So I'm not suggesting that the work you're doing isn't important and critical. I'm just saying, is there, of this $4 million requested increase, is some of it, or some of the overall budget, less important than others? Is there $2 million you could identify as, perhaps not absolutely urgent? And if so, that would be good once you sit and huddle and think about it, if you could pass that along to City Council.
Understood.
Okay. All right. I'm going to put it out to the public. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak? Okay. Bring it back to the council members. Councilmember Willier and Councilmember Oliver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The presentation indicates approximately 108,000 customers. I've always seen a number of 24,000 customers within city limits and 13,000 customers outside city limits.
Those are accounts. Those are a number of endpoint accounts.
Those are,
Customers refer to the amount of people that in each household. So if there are 3 or 4 people in each household, that would be on one account.
You have
So
a
it's a
population,
population.
you have a population of over 71,000 people just within the city.
Could I have a follow-up?
Yes.
So it's still 37,000 accounts.
Accounts, that's correct.
And I had another follow-up.
Yes.
So, I want to thank Public Works, Councilwoman Oliver and I, and Councilman, was it just the two of us? Went on a very extensive tour, and I want to thank you for doing that. And I have a lot of, I was very impressed by the facilities, and I know that it's an expensive system to run. So, we don't want to put off maintenance or anything like that. But I do have questions and even a lot of concerns about the indirect costs. I know that we're going to go into indirect costs after, but the portion of the budget that I really don't understand is why, the indirect costs seem to fall. For one thing, there seem to be a lot of indirect costs that we have questions about, but we can talk about that when we get to that section. But there's certain parts of the budget, like, for example, the wastewater treatment plant, they pay hardly any indirect costs. And, the
I can
Newcastle.
explain that to you if you'd like.
Well, let me just keep going. And then Newcastle County, they've been growing rapidly for years with more and more people, and yet their payment to the city of Wilmington for bulk sewage treatment has stayed like roughly the same. Like, it hasn't gone up nearly as much as direct user fees. And I just don't understand how we're allocating so much cost to those 37,000 customers and not sharing those costs across more. Like, we have Newcastle, all these people in Newcastle County who are benefiting from the sewage treatment plant that, their costs are barely budging. And yet we're talking about these increases year over year for the direct user. And I don't feel like it's fair.
All right, well, let me answer each part of your question. So as it relates to the wastewater treatment plant operation and having a relatively small amount of indirect cost allocated to it, that's because there's no, other than direct funded, split funded employees from the city that are managing that operation. It's completely done by contract operation, so it's all direct cost. As it relates to Newcastle County, there's an agreement in place with the county. It's a 10-year agreement. When the agreement was negotiated, they are responsible for 80% of the flow and 66.67% of the capital projects, which they are paying. We are at the 3-year anniversary coming up of that agreement, and now we have an opportunity to take a look at the flow and strength from the county with the data collected over the last 3 years, and there's a possibility that will change and move one way or the other. We're still in the process of gathering that data, and those are conversations that I'm going to be having very shortly with the county.
Could I have a follow-up cost?
Another follow-up.
So, these are contracted employees, but there's a lot of costs within Public Works that are contracted employees that we do put indirect costs onto. So I don't understand the logic for, if it's a contractor, then there's no indirect costs involved.
The indirect costs are typically employees from other divisions, other general fund divisions within the city that are providing service. So, and take a look at the wastewater treatment plant. You're going to get some police service, fire service. That we don't even do trash pickup over there, so they're not even taking advantage of our because they're an industrial customer, so they maintain their own trash pickup and everything else.
And they don't use our HR services or our legal services because they're provided by Jacobs.
I just have one follow-up. So I just want to explain my concern, which is that we want to make sure that we're not that we're sharing costs fairly, and also that we are not unfairly putting the burden on residential customers, and also that we're not drawing money off of the water sewer fund that needs to be reinvested in the very important facilities to deliver water services, to pay for services that are actually just general city services that should be paid for by the general fund.
Do you want to respond?
Just, we understand your concern, and it will be discussed further in detail in our next section. And, we go through all the specifics of the indirect costs in our 6-year financial plan.
All right, thank you. I would like to acknowledge Councilmember McCoy. And do you have a
I
question?
did have just one question.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I do apologize, I did not get a chance to see this on the Zoom. It was acting kind of crazy in the car. Didn't know whether or not this question had been asked, and you can make me aware if it has been, because I'll just go back and look at it. Wanted to find out, because I've heard continuously since I've been here, about the 1% to 2% of infrastructure that is corrected underneath our streets because of its age, and that we need to continually, make certain that we get on top of that. Wanted to find out whether or not we are only using Public Works, or are we contracting any of that work out so that we can actually increase that number? Because it seems as though the water valves and the mains are only being changed out as they break during the winter.
That's.
No, I'm just asking that question. Are we doing it any quicker?
We've got one of the largest contracts on the street right now that we've ever issued.
Okay.
For small mains and replacement for lead and copper, investigation and removal. And, a lot of work is happening. It's all throughout the city. I have 8 to 10 crews on any given day out there working that are doing main replacements.
In a contract that was put out to bid
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was all
over
I needed.
multiple years.
Our own resources are, our water service group is typically, they're dealing with the valve replacement, the hydrant replacement, or main breaks, which this year was a monumental year. We haven't had this many main breaks between November and February in probably the last 10 years. I think it was 139 main breaks from November to February because we haven't had a winter this cold.
Thank you. Councilmember Owens.
Yes, piggybacking off of what Councilwoman McCoy just said, with the water main breaks and seeing an elevated number of them this year, I believe it was at the last budget hearing that Public Works was at, you mentioned some of those water mains could be caused by the rollers that they're using on the streets, the vibration.
It actually was. So over in the Ninth Ward area on a couple of blocks I managed the street paving too. Literally, when they were done paving, that night is when the water started bubbling up. And when I found out that they were using a vibratory roller, we essentially gave them a map of the mains with the age, and we told them, anything older than 1950, you are not to vibrate. So that was stopped. A lot of mains, as you're well aware, because I think we talked about it, have been replaced over in Ninth Ward, and a lot of those areas are getting buttoned up, and they're starting to do restoration out there now.
My question was, when that happens, does the city have to pay to go back in and correct the water mains that have been broken, even if it ends up breaking on the resident side?
We'll go in, if something like that happens, yeah, we'll go in and fix the break.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it at a cost to us, or since they used the wrong?
It's at a cost to us, because the paving contractor had no idea he shouldn't be, they have no idea of the age of the mains. Once we found this was happening, this is a very unique situation where we've had somebody actually out there doing vibratory paving, and then it leaked that night. Once they were made aware of it, that practice was changed immediately, but I still had to send my crew out to fix the leak.
Okay. And can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Do we have a map of other mains that could be throughout the city that could be around the same age point?
Yes.
So that we know that when we contract someone out to do that work,
Absolutely.
to let them know prior?
Yeah, that's the first time we ever had something like that happen. But yeah, we do. I have tight coordination between our street paving engineers and our transmission distribution engineers. We're all talking all the time. So, who's going to be responsible for this? Is it going to be water, or is this going to be paved? Just so we're not stepping on each other's toes out there.
Thank you.
Councilmember Willard.
Yeah, stormwater spending in the budget, it seems to be a lot less than stormwater billings. Could you explain why?
The last time I looked at this, the stormwater fees that were being collected were essentially right at the level that they needed to be to support the debt service and the operating expenses. There's another part that you don't see in the operating budget, which is the debt service for a lot of these stormwater projects. One of the biggest ones being the South Wilmington Wetland Park, which we've spent over $40 million on. So that debt service is all coming online now, and the stormwater division pays that debt service.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Oliver.
Sure.
I heard you talk about South Wilmington. I haven't heard anything regarding 11th Street Bridge where Hurricane Ida really hit the residents over there. Is there any, I don't see anything in the report that any infrastructure being done over there or,
We have done there's been a lower Brandywine flooding study done. Assistant Water Division Director Brian Lennon from our department is heading that up, and they are moving through that now, and that study will come up with recommendations for what needs to happen. We've actually also put in some congressionally directed spending grant requests to get funding to use towards work in the lower Brandywine area.
follow-up?
Yes.
So we're talking about the lower Brandywine area, which is good.
So this is going to be from like the 16th Street Bridge down towards the 11th Street Bridge. Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. One last follow-up.
Yes.
Since the weather is much warmer, when will we be helping with the potholes?
Hey, I've got 2 paving contractors on the street every day.
Okay, is it okay just to send you an email about some potholes that need to be fixed?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, Councilmember Owens.
Only because it was brought up by my esteemed colleague from the 3rd District. 34th and Franklin Street needs to be repaved. That's all I
Yeah, it's
have to
already
say.
on our list.
All right,
I already
thank you.
got it going into a schedule.
Thank you.
Well, seen multiple pictures of it. We will not be going onto the private property, though, just
Correct,
so you're
yeah.
aware. All right.
Okay, Spruce Street. What's going on with Spruce Street?
Bruce is state maintained. We have been pushing DelDOT to put pressure on Delmarva. My understanding is Delmarva's contractor will be doing the paving for the areas that they tore up for the gas work.
Did they give us a time frame?
We asked for it to be done as soon as possible, but yeah.
Okay.
Your calls may help as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember McCoy.
Thank you. Yes, that was going to be my follow-up question. Whether or not you're truly coordinating with, Delmarva or whomever when it comes to making certain that as we are trying our best to get these streets repaved and then to see somebody have to go back and open it up is heartbreaking.
So as I think you were on council, and when we changed the code around back in 2022, so if we try our best to coordinate with everybody that we can control. If somebody is not coordinated with us and they go back and open the road up within the 5-year moratorium period, they're responsible for 50-foot curb to curb, not just some little patch.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
I mean, and we are enforcing that.
Very good. Okay, I need to put it out to the public. Again, is there anyone in the public that would like to speak? And before we close out, any other council members would like to speak before we go to break? Okay. All right. So having said that, again, I would like to thank Mr. Jones, OMB Fiscal and Operational Analyst. Thank you, Commissioner Williams, and also Deputy Commissioner Vincent and your team for presenting on this evening. And I would like to say that if there are any follow-up information, questions, etc., I'm asking that you please provide that information to Ms. Bassnight. And so, again, thank you to your entire team. And at this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we will return at 5:58. Let's say 6 o'clock. That's 6 o'clock. Okay? All right. See you in 10 minutes. Good evening, honorable members of council, Chief of Staff Simmons, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephanie Mergler, Department Heads, Office of Management and Budget, Public Works Commissioner Williams, and members of the public. I'm calling to order the Finance Committee budget hearing for the Water Sewer Fund 6-year financial plan with Public Works Consultant Black and Veatch, as we are just resuming from a 10-minute break. First, I would like to start by recognizing members of the Finance Committee that are in attendance this evening by doing a roll call. Councilmember Darby, Councilmember Oliver,
Present.
Councilmember Bracy,
Present.
Councilmember Hackett, Councilmember Spadola, President Congo. I would also, thank you. I would also like to recognize any other council members present. Councilmember Owens, Councilmember Cabrera, Councilmember Willard,
Present.
Councilmember Johnson, Councilmember Field,
Present.
Member McCoy.
Here.
Thank you, council members. I would like to inform everyone that public comments will be made at the end of each department's budget hearing and that we look forward for participation from the public. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes. If there is any follow-up information during any of the budget hearings, Ms. Bassnight will track and follow up on those requests. The budget hearings are limited due to time constraints. I ask if all can be mindful and respectful of time. All budget questions should be a fiscal budgetary matter only and will be limited based upon time limitations. I ask if my colleagues have any questions, please raise your hand. It is intended for each department to present, then questions are slated afterwards. I now turn it over to Commissioner Williams to introduce the team that will be presenting the Water Sewer Fund 6-year financial plan, as well as the team from Black and Veatch. And this hearing is tentatively slated for 90 minutes. Commissioner Williams.
Good evening. Thank you, Madam Chair, Council President, members of City Council, council staff, and members of the public. Again, my name's Kelly Williams. I am the Commissioner of Public Works. We appreciate you taking your time this afternoon to review and discuss the Water Sewer 6-year financial plan. Sitting next to me are Chris O., the Water Division Director, and Prabha Kumar of Black and Veatch. Prabha and Chris and her partner, Rupa Jha, will be making the presentation of the financial plan. Also, I'd like to recognize Brett Taylor, the Director of Finance, who is also available for questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I would like to turn it over to the next presenter.
Next slide, please. In our discussion today, we're going to go through a lot of different things, and so this is just a little overview. We're going to start talking about the fund overview. We're going to talk about the Water Sewer Fund indirect costs, the water sector outlook, the financial planning process, the proposed financial plan.
Excuse me. WITM wants you to adjust your mic to speak in the microphone a little closer. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Okay.
The peer utility comparison, and also the value of water. Next slide, please. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the overview of the Water Sewer Fund. And so the Wilmington utility is a water, wastewater, and stormwater utility. We treat water, wastewater, and we collect and treat wastewater, and also stormwater management. As you can see on these maps on the right, we have 2 different service areas. We have the water service area and the sewer and stormwater service area. Next slide, please. And so what does our utility really consist of? We have over 37,000 water accounts, 2 water treatment plants. We treat over 5 billion gallons of water. There's over 26,000 stormwater accounts, 2.5 billion gallons of wastewater treated, 400 miles of sewer pipes, over 23,000 sewer accounts, over 400 miles of water pipes, and 1 regional wastewater treatment plant. Next slide, please. The city has over $1 billion worth of water assets. And so some of these assets include 9 elevated tanks, 1 regional raw water reservoir, 1 finished water reservoir, and over 400 miles of pipes. And some of these pipes are over 100 years old. We also have 2 water treatment plants, and they are over 75 years old. This picture on the right is actually of our Porter treatment plant. We have over 900 million of wastewater assets, including 3 pump stations, combined sewer outfalls and tide gates, inlets, and manholes, over 300 miles of pipes, and some of those are over 120 years old, and 1 regional wastewater treatment plant, which is over 65 years old. We also have green infrastructure throughout the city as well. And so our enterprise fund, what this really is on the right-hand side is our utility costs. And our utility costs are comprised of operations and maintenance, direct costs, operations and maintenance, support service costs, which are services provided by the general fund to the water sewer fund, capital, which is cash finance, capital investments, debt service finance, capital investments, and then our reserves, our O&M reserves and our rate stabilization reserves. Both are required by city ordinance. And these costs are funded by our revenues. So there's water, sewer, and stormwater retail, and county wholesale wastewater treatment. And the other funding sources are through grants, GO bonds, and state revolving fund loans.
I would like to recognize Councilmember Owen. Thank you.
Next slide, please. And so what is really our goal? And our goal is to adopt industry financial best practices to build long-term financial resilience and deliver safe and cost-effective water, sewer, and stormwater services. And so what that really means is that this fund is dedicated completely to the water sewer utility, that it's fully supported by user fees, that there's a nexus between user cost and utility cost, that we have a consistent revenue stability, adequate reserves, and long-term self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. And so Wilmington's journey, we're really having a journey towards long-term resilience. And we started in FY2025 to eliminate fiscal deficit. And what our goals were at that time was a 30-day O&M reserve, a 1.1 debt coverage, and 0% cash financing of capital. And so we've moved to this build portion of our journey, and we're trying to achieve 60-day O&M reserve, 1.5 debt coverage, and 15% cash financing of capital. And we've really been struggling to meet this middle box. And what we really need to get to is to be long-term financial stability is to be able to sustain box. And that would look at 120 days O&M reserve, 1.3% debt coverage, and 20% cash financing of capital. And so I'm going to turn it over to Prabha, and she's going to talk a little bit about the water sewer fund indirect cost.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Chris. Good evening, Madam Chair and Council President, Council members, and the city leadership team. So we're going to talk about the indirect cost. Indirect cost, just to give a clarity, it is an integral part of the city's operations and maintenance budget. So every water sewer fund direct division has an indirect cost. And then also every direct division of the general fund has an indirect cost built into that. So how does that cost actually, how is that cost determined? That is determined through what we call the indirect cost analysis. So a comprehensive indirect cost analysis was really done. And the purpose of that was to really to determine what support services are provided by the general fund, and then determining the cost of those support services, and then allocating the cost of those support services to the water sewer fund direct departments, but also to the general fund direct departments, and we'll talk a little more about that. So the reason for that is to have a reasonable nexus or a relationship between the services that a direct department receives from the general fund, support services, and the allocation that is given to that particular direct department. And that is important because, especially in the case of the water sewer fund, that indirect cost comes into the water sewer fund's budget, and then that is then really collected in the form of a ratepayer revenue. So there has to be an alignment between what the water sewer fund pays to the general fund as an indirect cost. So because of that need to have that alignment, this study is actually done. So what was done really was to update the indirect cost. The city always had an indirect cost allocation plan, which is held by the Office of Management and Budget. And so all that allocation was reviewed. So we'll talk more about the methodology that was used, and then also an indirect cost allocation plan is essentially delivered. So the previous time this kind of a comprehensive study for all of the indirect cost centers was done was in 2013. So there was a time frame between 2013 and now it was done again in 2024. Next slide, please. So how was the study actually done? The first step in the process is to really confirm again what are the direct cost centers of the general fund and the direct cost centers of the water sewer fund, and also confirming what are the indirect cost centers of the general fund. Once that is done, then the next step is to say, okay, for each of the indirect cost centers, what are the cost drivers that should be used to allocate the cost? Because the nature of a service provided by each indirect cost department could be different. So therefore, it's not like a one-size-fits-all. You have to really look at each indirect cost, determine what are the appropriate cost drivers, and then use those cost drivers to then actually allocate the cost. So that was the second step that was done. So once the cost drivers for each of the indirect cost centers was identified and the percentage allocation was determined, then using that, comprehensive allocation was done for every indirect cost center, and those costs are allocated to every direct cost center. We'll talk more about that. And then once all these very detailed allocations were done, then it was a matter of then aggregating all of those costs for the various direct departments of the general fund and the direct departments of the water sewer fund. And so all this study was done using the fiscal year 2025 operations and maintenance budget that was approved by the council last year. So that was the basis for doing this cost allocation. Next slide, please. So when we look at the total general fund budget that provides all the support services, that budget was $34.4 million, essentially $34.5 million. And if you take that $34.5 million, $17.1 million was the personnel budget, then $16.9 was the MS&E, material supplies and equipment budget, and then there's a small amount of internal services budget. So that's all of that is the general fund budget support services. But when we do support services cost, typically if there is a grant, then usually that is not allocated. So there is a grant and scholarships of about $800,000. So that was not allocated because that's really a grant. That money comes from someplace else. So, and then therefore the net indirect cost allocation that we had to do in terms of the total was $33.6 million. So that was the baseline that had to then be allocated between the water sewer fund and the general fund centers. So there are a total of 27 indirect cost centers. And then when we do the allocation again, the depreciation and interest. So even though in the operations and maintenance budget, you will see a line item for depreciation and interest, that is not allocable as part of the indirect cost fund. Okay. Only the operations and maintenance costs are allocable. Next slide, please. So then what was done to really allocate that $33.6 million? So in the second column, what you're seeing is the various departments of the city of Wilmington. And then in the third column, what you're seeing are the indirect cost centers. So there are that many indirect cost centers in the city, 27 indirect cost centers. And then each indirect cost center, now the cost of that has to be allocated. To do that, as you can see, up to 3 cost drivers were defined. And again, some of these cost drivers, these are all not new because many of these cost drivers already existed in the previous study that was done. It was just validated to say whether they are still appropriate. So for example, we'll just take one item and walk you through why you have to do that. So if you take the Office of Management and Budget, which is the second line item, Office of Management and Budget is an indirect cost center. Then how do they provide services to the general fund departments, and how do they provide services to the water sewer fund direct departments? There are three things that really drive their cost. One is the amount of time the staff of the Office of Management and Budget actually spend on the various divisions of the water sewer fund activities and the various direct divisions of the general fund department. So one is the staff time. The second is not everything that they do is just allocated based on staff time. It also depends on the number of transactions that they actually handle. So if they handle more transactions in terms of revenues and expenditures for the water sewer fund department, then more of that cost has to be allocated to the water sewer fund department. There may be some general fund department, direct departments where they may not be doing that many transactions, then that gets less of an allocation. So that was a second driver. And then there's another small part of what Office of Management and does. That is, regardless of what activities happen in a water sewer fund or the general fund, it is literally dependent on the number of employees in each of the direct departments, whether it is general fund or the water sewer fund. So therefore, 2% of their cost was allocated literally based on the proportion of the number of employees, which is referenced as FTEs, full-time equivalent members. So that department is a little unique in that to truly allocate the cost of the OMB, we had to use 3 cost drivers. And these are the cost drivers that was defined working with the department, because each department knows exactly how they provide service, what services they provide. So we cannot just simply come up with those. All these were, for every indirect cost center, the kind of cost drivers was defined by working with that particular department. So another example would be, let's look at line item 12, finance, procurement and records. How do you determine the cost of the procurement and records cost? How do you allocate it to the direct departments of the water sewer fund and the general fund? That's really dependent on the number of contracts that they administer. However, it is not just determining the number of contracts, because one contract may be $10,000 for which they may not spend much time. Another contract may be $6 million or $20 million for which they may spend a lot of time, because large contracts go through a lot of processes. So what they did was to take all their contracts for a certain period of time, and they looked at the value of each contract, they put them into tiers, and then they were able to determine how they are spending the time, which department is having a lot of these different types of contracts and the value of the contracts, and based on that, then they were able to allocate the time. So the number of contracts by tiered contract value was a key driver for allocating all of that cost. So, and then if you take, for example, information technologies department, each indirect cost center of the information technology department, they provide different type of service. So for example, if you take the document management, that is literally dependent on the number of requests for document management that comes from the various direct departments of the general fund and the water sewer fund. So that's kind of fairly straightforward. But if you look at data processing, which is information technology data processing, they handle a lot of different things. They handle processing, the technology run for the billing, utility billing, tax billing, for the geographic information system. So there's a lot of things that they do. So the way those costs they allocated was they first looked at how their personnel are spending time. So some personnel are dedicated to, they may be spending more of their time for a water sewer fund related technology services, and some may be doing less for other departments. So that was one driver. The second driver was also the number of FTEs. So there are certain things that they process based on the number of employees in each of those direct departments. And lastly, they also use contract employees. So then they also look at how are their contract employees spending time. So they looked at all of those things, and that's how they came up with the drivers. So every indirect cost center went through this detailed process of looking at how their people, how their material supplies, equipment costs are spent, and based on that, then they were able to develop a detailed allocation. So this was a process that was done over 3 months through October, November, December, working with every department, having interviews with them, and then they then working individually, internally, and then providing the information. Next slide, please. So what we showed in the previous slide was the 27 indirect cost centers and the cost drivers. Now, those indirect costs had to be allocated to these 42 direct divisions of the water sewer fund and the general fund. So that's what you're seeing, a complete listing of these 42 direct divisions of the actually the city of Wilmington. Okay, next slide, please. So when we went through this detailed allocation, indirect cost center by indirect cost center, and doing all of these detailed allocations, the objective results that came out of this detailed allocation process using the 2025 council-approved O&M budget was $25.7 million ended up getting allocated to the general fund direct departments, and $7.9 million got allocated to the water sewer fund direct departments. So in terms of percentages, it translated to about 23.6% and 76.4%. Just for reference, in 2013, this same kind of exercise was done. The water sewer fund was around 22.9%. So the range after so many years is still very much within the range of the cost. So that's really what was done, but this was a completely objective, valid process and following the industry accepted methodology for allocating indirect cost. Next slide, please. So now when you look at the $25.7 million that was allocated to the direct cost centers of the general fund, you see there are 31 direct cost centers in the general fund, and you literally can see which direct cost center got what allocation. For example, some of the major ones that got a lot of allocation is police administration, because they have a lot of personnel, and so that department really gets a lot of overall support services. And the next one you can see there is, for example, public works, licensing and inspections. They also get a lot of support services from the various departments. And then you see, in the case of public works, non-utility, you see transportation department, street cleaning. So all this was literally derived through the detailed allocation process. And so that's the 25.7 that went to the general fund direct cost centers. Next slide, please. And now when you look at the water sewer, which is the other part, next slide, please. Yeah, so now if you see the remaining $7.9 million gets allocated to the water sewer fund. And here again, just to be very clear, so in the water sewer fund, everyone is aware that sewer maintenance, water system, wastewater treatment, and stormwater are the direct cost centers of the water sewer fund. In addition, administration audit, administration finance, accounting, meter readers, account services, they are also direct divisions of the water sewer fund. So the water sewer fund is unique in that it not only has line item 9, 10, 11, and 12, but also the accounting, meter readers, account services, central cashier, they are also direct cost centers of the water sewer department. So if you take the O&M budget and look at 421 fund, you're going to see all these direct cost centers. So that's how each direct cost center got the allocation, and so that makes up the $7.9 million. So this is the process that was used objectively to really allocate every part of the cost between the water sewer fund and the general fund direct cost centers. So next slide, please. So in summary, the industry best practice is what was used in Wilmington, which Wilmington is always used for allocating the indirect cost. So there are 31 direct cost centers of the general fund. There are 11 direct cost centers of the water sewer fund that makes up the 42 direct cost centers. And the 27 indirect cost center cost was $33.6 million. That got allocated to these 42 direct cost centers, with $7.9 million for the water sewer fund and $25.7 million for the general fund. So this is looking back, taking the 2025 budget and developing this entire cost allocation model. Now, what is the importance of that? Even though 25 is already gone, but this basis is then used by the Office of Management and Budget to determine the cost for 2026, the fiscal year 2026, which is the proposed budget. So the proposed budget, the same process is used. This model is used with all these allocation factors, and then except instead of 2025, they update the numbers with 2026 proposed budget, and then that helps them determine the indirect cost for each of the water sewer fund direct cost centers and the general fund direct cost centers. So that's really the process that was used for developing this indirect cost allocation model, which OMB will continue to use. Next slide, please. So now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit and really talk about the water sewer sector outlook. So this is a little important because just understanding the context of what is the industry context for all the utility services, utility costs, the rate setting process. So the reason it's important to take a look because the water sector is getting increasingly more and more dynamic. And part of the reason is the changing conditions, whether it is environmental conditions, economic conditions, and the confluence of challenges. Many utilities are also dealing with workforce issues or the lack thereof. And typically the water sewer operations and maintenance costs are even more higher than the normal inflationary trends that we see. And then the capital costs are increasingly getting higher. So all of this, what we call the confluence of challenges, hit the water sector and the sewer sector all the time. So that's really what is happening right now. And how do you then manage it? So there are challenges that we know, the regulations that we know, but the industry also faces regulations that we really do not know that may be coming down the pike. So that is why overall planning for the long-term resilience, which really means really being positioned for the economic challenges, the environmental challenges, and the societal needs that a community has to face. So really addressing all of them, not only for the short term, but being in a position to address them even for the longer term. That's really what utilities are striving for. And so increasingly, utility resilience is becoming a very important construct in the water sector. Next slide, please. So in terms of the operating costs, I think we've kind of talked about it before, but just as a recap, before the pandemic drove things into a high gear. A lot of the costs started increasing, and there was some substantive rate of increase for chemicals and supplies and labor and all of those costs. Now what we are seeing, now that pandemic is behind us, what we are seeing is it's not like the cost went down to the pre-pandemic level. It is just that the level of increases that we saw, double-digit increases, has slowed down for the O&M cost. Now it's become little more of just a little than higher than inflationary. It's still higher than normal inflationary costs, but it is not as bad as what it was during the pandemic. So that's where we say these costs have kind of stabilized, but really entered a new normal. Costs are never going back to the pre-pandemic levels. Next slide, please. On the capital side, what we are continuing to find in the industry is that, again, based on research of about more than 700 capital programs in the country of public utilities, really the substantive investments needed in all the linear assets, meaning the pipes, they are aging in many places in the country. They are getting a failing grade in many places. And then the second most investment that is needed is the treatment facilities. And typically what you find is that the cost for the capital intensive cost for the wastewater treatment is much higher than water treatment, and that's the reality because wastewater treatment investments are more costly to do than the water treatment plant investment, and that's what the research is also showing. So if you take about this research was done with multiple utilities, like 780 capital programs, and this was the finding. So linear assets is the most expensive. Then there's most of the CIPs, the next CIPs on the capital improvement program is on plants, and then it comes down to pumps and motors. So there's a huge difference, as you can see in this chart. So that's the reality of the capital investments needed for any utility, large or small, in the country right now. Next slide, please. So we talked about the O&M outlook in the water sector, the capital investments that are needed. Then the third leg in the pillar, or the third pillar, is the regulatory mandates, because public utilities and investor-owned utilities have to meet the regulatory mandates. So the PFAS that you've all heard of, that was really promulgated. And now the lead and copper rule was promulgated in October of 2024. So utilities have certain timelines and deadlines that they have to meet these regulations. And then there's also an anticipated nutrient limits for the Delaware River that would be coming, and Wilmington contributes to the Delaware River, so those limits will be imposed on Wilmington as well. So why is this important? This is important because these regulatory mandates to fulfill, it requires both capital investment and operating costs associated with that. So as you can see, all of these confluence of challenges really impose challenges on the sector. And the reason we are mentioning it is because when people say, how come costs are always increasing for a utility sector, these are the reasons as to why costs are increasing, because these don't stop, because aging infrastructure is a problem, and you can't repair all the aging infrastructure in 1 year, so it's a consistent program that utilities have to invest on to maintain the integrity in the delivery of the service. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, we talked about those three elements. In addition to that, there are other factors as well. Cybersecurity is increasingly becoming a big issue. So much of technology is being deployed in providing the services. If so much of technology is being deployed in the services, which also means that technology has to be safe from vulnerability. So that is requiring a lot more focus on cybersecurity as well. Weather risk and resilience, and especially Wilmington being kind of like a coastal community, that also plays a role because any kind of a coastal resilience or lack thereof is going to affect the operations and then affect the cost. And so being resilient to extreme weather conditions that are increasingly happening is going to be important. And then the economic market. The economic market is becoming volatile. It is not as stable as it was before. The borrowing costs are increasing. So those have to be factored in to the planning process as well. So all these play a big role in the utility sector. Next slide, please. So how do you then really build resilience? It's easy to talk about all these challenges. How does a utility like Wilmington build it? This is through this consistent financial planning process that Wilmington has had since 2005. So now what we're going to really talk about is the next 6-year plan, really the 2026 through 2031 plan. That's what we're really going to be discussing the rest of this session. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the financial planning, again, Wilmington has adopted years ago the consistent industry best practice of doing a multi-year financial plan. And the financial plan is not done in vacuum. It is really done with the idea of achieving certain metrics. So certain metrics provide the guardrail for resilience. So we will see as we go along for operations reserves, for debt service, there are certain metrics. And that's what Wilmington strive to achieve. And the most important thing, the revenues that it generates in any given year, at a minimum, at the absolute minimum, has to cover the operations and maintenance costs of the year and the debt service cost at a minimum. So which means it has to have enough revenues to cover 100% of that particular year's needs. And that's a basic requirement. And then on top of that, it has to have some money for reserves. So all these are metrics that really the financial plan helps a utility to kind of achieve. So, but at the same time, the reason a multi-year is done is because if we know 3 years from now, there's going to be a lot of debt service that's coming in, we cannot suddenly say 3 years from now we will deal with it. You have to start looking at it now so that you can plan for that, anything that's coming 2 to 3 years from now, so that the rates don't go just up and down, so that there's a level of stability in how rates are increasing gradually. So that's why a multi-year plan is always done and presented, even though in Wilmington the council approves only 1 year of rate increase, the utility always has to look at 5 years ahead and present it to the council so that the council can make an informed decision of what is really happening. Because any 1 year action affects the following year's finances as well. So when we talk about financial plan, there are 4 major components we are going to be talking about. The first one we are going to talk about is the operations and maintenance cost projections for the study period. We are going to talk about the capital cost projections of the study period. Those two make up the revenue requirements, including any reserve requirements. Then on the other side is the revenues. So we're going to talk about how we are projecting revenues that are coming in now and how are we projecting the revenues for the study period under the existing rates in addition to miscellaneous revenues. And lastly, there's also this bucket of reserves and fund balances. How are we leveraging that in the financial plan? So putting all these 4 major categories together really develops what we call the financial plan. Next slide, please. Next slide. So now we're going to kind of shift gear, and my colleague Rupa is going to walk us through the revenue requirements for the 2025 through 2031 study period.
Thank you, Prabha. Good evening, honorable council members, council chair, and council president. I'll present the next few slides on revenue requirements or expenses, as well as the revenues for the water sewer fund and how these play into the financial plan. Next slide. Okay. So the key revenue requirements for the water sewer fund are the capital improvement program. So over the next 6 years, which is the study period, the total capital improvement program is about $413 million, both for water and wastewater. The O&M cost on average is due to inflationary and other factors is increasing about 3.6 million on an annual basis. We have some phased money that is going into the reserve balances for future needs. So we're building up the reserve balance slowly but surely over the 6-year period. And we are also providing, through the Water Sewer Fund, some monetary assistance for customers that are elderly or disabled or low income that need that monetary assistance. Next slide, please. So as we talked earlier, the O&M expenditures is one of the biggest components of the revenue requirements. It is the FY2026 O&M that you see in the first bar, about 80.5 million. That is based on the proposed fiscal year 2026 budget, and that is projected to grow to 92.7 million over the 6-year period, and that is due to the inflation in various categories like chemicals and staff salaries, benefits. So all these are needed to have a fully functioning 24/7 water utility. So those O&M expenses are going up based on the inflationary factors. Next slide, please. So this slide presents a comparison of the Water Sewer Fund O&M budget, how it is changing, how it has changed over the past 5 years with the consumer price index for all items, as well as the consumer price index or CPI for just the water, sewer, and trash. And what this illustrates is that the O&M budget for the Water Sewer Fund for the city, shown in the yellow line, has been typically under the water, sewer, and trash increases, annual increases, which is shown in the blue line. So Public Works has done, and Water Sewer Fund has done a good job of trying to contain costs to the extent they can, but of course some things are not exactly under their control. Next slide, please. So this slide presents the total 6-year capital improvement program for the water and wastewater, which is about 413 million. The water CIP is about 249 million of that, and the wastewater CIP, which includes both sewer and stormwater, is about 164 million. So between 26 and 29, the water CIP that we see in the blue bars, that is pretty high because it's focused on treatment plant upgrades, specifically related to PFAS regulation, because that deadline is April of 2029. So the water CIP has heavily focused on that in the beginning years. In addition to that, there is the transmission and distribution related upgrades, and then in the outer years, 2030 and 2031, it's more of a levelized routine upgrades. Between 26 and 27 or 28, mostly between 26 and 27, the wastewater treatment plant upgrades, there's a heavy emphasis on that, and then on the wastewater side, it gets more at a normal level starting 28 through 2031. Next slide, please. So this slide presents the key highlights for the water, 248 million CIP, and as we mentioned earlier, the 60% or 149 million of the water CIP is composed of improvements to the water supply and treatment plant upgrades, which is very important and critical for providing safe, clean water to the customers and while maintaining regulatory compliance. The remaining 86 million and 13.7 million is focused on, and out of the 86 million, I would say the lead and copper rule requirement and replacement of lead service lines, which has a direct bearing on the public health there's a heavy emphasis on that over the next few years as well. Next slide, please. So on the wastewater side, the bulk of the CIP, that's almost 55%, is focused on the wastewater treatment plant upgrades. As Director Crisso mentioned earlier, this is a 65-plus-year-old plant. It has time has come over the past few years. The Public Works has been doing a lot of upgrades at the plant, so there are a lot of upgrades that are needed at the plant over the next few years. So the focus is on that. This is another very critical asset since it's a regional wastewater treatment plant. A lot of the flow from the county also comes to this treatment plant, not just the city. So this is a very important asset that needs to be upgraded. And we have almost another 69 million of collection system and pumping improvements, and a small portion is for stormwater projects. Next slide, please. So how do we fund the 413 million of capital program? This slide presents this breakout of the 6-year funding of the capital program. And as we can see in the blue section of the pie chart, which is almost 300 million, there is a very significant portion of that funding comes from the state revolving fund loans. Those loans are favorable in terms of interest rates for the city. They're typically lower in interest rate compared to general obligation bond. And there's a lighter blue section of 47 million that shows the principal forgiveness associated with those SRF loans. And I would also like to point out that in addition to the principal forgiveness, some of the recent SRFs have had the no interest during construction. Mm-hmm. So that has helped lower the debt service and the cost for the water sewer fund as well. And the remaining, there is some general obligation bond of about 20 million in that dark gray bar. And then we also have other sources of income. There's a small amount of grant money in there as well, and cash financing. Next slide, please. So this chart presents the existing, future, and the total debt service. The total debt service is shown in that line that sits on top of the bar chart for the existing and proposed debt service. So in the initial years of the plan, the existing debt service is higher, which you see as the dark blue bar. But as we go into the later years, the existing debt starts to get paid off, so the existing debt service goes down. But as new projects are completed and new debt is issued, the proposed debt service keeps adding up. And so the total debt service, including both existing and proposed, it goes from around 22.9 million in 2026 to about 37.5 million by 2031, which is the end of the study period. Next slide, please. So this is the last component of the cost drivers or the revenue requirements that we were talking about earlier. There are two types of monetary assistance that is provided by the Water Sewer Fund to the customers. The first one, which has been in place for a long, long time, as you see on the right side, there are two components. So the elderly and disabled discount, as mentioned in the rate ordinance, so that amounts to approximately $475,000 per year in terms of the monetary discount provided to those customers. And over the 6-year financial plan period, it amounts to about 3.6 million. On the other side, something that was instituted not very long ago was the Utility Payment Assistance Program, and that is in the budget at $250,000 per year. So over the 6-year period, that amounts to about 1.5 million. And whatever funds are not utilized in a given year for the Utility Payment Assistance Program do roll over into the next year, so they are available for assistance to the customers in future years as well. So in that sense, the money doesn't just go away. So on the left side, we just wanted to show the number of customers that have been helped with this program. So there are about 940 accounts with those kinds of agreements, and the average support provided per customer is about $1,200. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So now we have talked about the expenses or the cost side of things, so we'll not talk about how do we fund those costs. So how do we project revenues? Where do we get the revenues from? As Director O mentioned earlier, the water sewer fund revenues have three major components. The retail user charge revenues, which comprise the water, sewer, and stormwater charges. They are the biggest component of it. The wholesale wastewater treatment revenues that comes from Newcastle County, that's another second biggest component. And then there's a very small portion of the revenues, which are called the miscellaneous revenues. These are like permit fees or antenna rental fees. So those are a small portion of the revenues as well, and interest and penalties, those kinds of. Next slide, please. So what we have in this table is the projected revenue under the existing retail rates. So lines 1, 2, and 3 show the water, sewer, and stormwater utility retail revenues under existing rates. And the revenues under existing rates for the retail customers is the same between 2026 and 2031, is because we have the same projections of accounts and consumption, which determine these revenues, and we are applying the 2025, which is the existing rates, to those. So because we are not projecting any growth under the current plan, based on historical information, we don't see the need to project any growth because historical information doesn't indicate that. So the revenues, these are revenues under existing rates. So if there were no rate increases, this is what the revenues would look like between 2026 and 2031. So the total revenues for retail customers under existing rates, as you can see in line 4, is at $71.5 million between 26 and 2031. The wholesale wastewater treatment revenues from Newcastle County, that is based on the costs that are provided by the contract operator. So it is more like a pass-through. So whatever costs the contract operator provides, those costs, and there are some city costs that are added to it, and a portion of that operating cost and capital cost is paid by the contract, paid by Newcastle County. So on the one side, it's a revenue, but on the other side, it's also an expense because the city has already incurred those expenses. The miscellaneous revenues are projected based on the budget, and in discussions with the city, we look at the historical trends as well to see how it is trending. But overall, miscellaneous revenues, some categories go up and down, so it's really hard to predict. But we project that based on just the experience that the city is having, as well as the budgeted number. So the total revenues under existing rates are expected to go from $97.1 million in 2026 to 104 or 105 million roughly by 2031. And that increase is only due to line 5, which is the wholesale wastewater treatment, which is the number that's changing. Next slide, please. So before I turn over to Ms. Kumar and she can talk about the financial plan, we have the revenues, we have the revenue requirements, and we also have the fund balances in the water sewer fund that we utilize because these are funds that are available at the end of the year for us to use for various needs. So the first one is capital proceeds. So these are unspent bond proceeds that are available to be used for different types of capital projects. We also have the O&M reserve balance. So the O&M reserve balance is maintained at 17% of following year's O&M. So that balance is available to be carried forward. And when we talk about the financial plan, we will emphasize that because that balance is available, only an incremental amount needs to be added to that O&M reserve balance to bring it back up each year to the 17% of the following year's O&M budget. And that's because each year the O&M budget goes up slightly. And then we also have the rate stabilization reserve balance available. At the end of 2024, it was 5.9 million. And we draw or deposit into the rate stabilization fund depending on the needs of the financial plan. So I would like to now turn it over back to Prabha to take us through the next set of slides and discuss the financial plan.
Thank you, Rupa. Next slide, please. So Ms. Jha talked about the various components of the overall water sewer fund, both the revenues, the revenue requirements, and the available fund balances. Now, how do we bring all of that together to really do what is called a cash flow analysis, which is really the financial plan? So the key thing to note here, everything that we have to do for a utility, for a public utility, in the case of financial planning, is on a cash basis. While even though, as you may have seen in terms of the annual financial statements and other things that the City of Wilmington publishes, they are on an accrual basis because of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, the GASB requirements. But here, for the utility has to be done on a cash basis because the revenues come in, and that is all that is available to pay all the expenditures, whether it is a city's own expenditure or city's contractor's expenditure, all of that it's a cash in and cash out. So that is why we have to do it on a cash basis. So Ms. Jha talked about the revenues coming in under existing rates, and then so that is one source of revenue. Then the other source, which is not really a revenue, which is a reserve, is the rate stabilization money, the 5.9 million. When we begin the analysis, that is what is all available in the water sewer fund. So those are the only two parts of money that is there. What are the expenses? She talked about the O&M requirements projection. She talked about the debt service projections. Then she also talked about there's a very little cash financing of capital. There's really nothing much, and you will see why, because there's really no money to do cash financing of capital, at least in the immediate term, and we will talk about that. And then by council ordinance, the water sewer fund has to maintain 17% of the following year's operations and maintenance budget as a reserve. So that's actually a requirement. And then if you draw money 1 year from the rate stabilization reserve, at some point you have to put money back. Otherwise, the rate stabilization reserve is going to get completely depleted and it will never be available in the future for rate mitigation. So we do have to look at that as well in the financial plan. So we bring the revenues and the revenue requirements together. It's really a balancing act of how do we then develop a financial plan in a meaningful way so that it doesn't put significant burden in terms of rate increases, but at the same time, it also has to meet the needs of the utility in terms of all the cost obligations. So we bring that together, and that when we bring the revenues and the revenue requirement projections together, that tells us, is there a gap that needs to be fulfilled? And that gap then tells us what the level of revenue adjustments that are needed each year, and also the reserve balance that needs to be maintained during the financial planning period. Next slide, please. So when we look at the financial plan, so let's just go one by one so that we can walk you through what exactly does this depict. So in line 1 is the revenue under existing rates, which Ms. Jha talked about. It really goes from 96.9 million that is what is expected. So we just have another couple of months to go in this fiscal year. We're expecting about 96.9 million at this point in time, based on the data that we have received and we have projected. And then that is expected to grow to 97.1 to 104, and that is primarily because of the increase in Newcastle County revenues. So that is line 1. And then what we are projecting is an increase of 6.5%. You see the series of increases in water sewer and the series of increases that we deem are necessary in stormwater. And if those two increases happen, then the additional revenue that we will pick up goes from 4.1 million to 32.3 million, because the reason is it is a compounding effect. So in this year, if you have a 6.5% increase, then the next year the 8% increase comes on top of it. And so that's the level of revenue projections. The question is, why is that needed? You will see, because that is needed because there are costs that are going up. So it is not like the revenues are just being projected without any basis. It's really completely aligned with the cost projections. So the revenues then go up from really 101 million in 2026 through 137 million. So now how is that money going to be used? Of that, in line 6, the O&M cost goes up from 80 million to 92 million based on the projections. Then the next cost item is debt service, which goes from 22.9 million to 37.5 million, primarily driven by the extensive capital program that needs to be done. So that includes both the existing debt service and the proposed debt service that Ms. Jha talked about. And then the next part is cash financing. Typically, the industry best practice is at least 15 to 20% of a utilities capital program should be cash financed. Because if you completely keep borrowing and borrowing 100%, then there is no equity that is built in the system. So best practice is to do at least 20 to 30%. In Wilmington, that has never been possible, so we've tried our best to keep it at about 10 to 15%, but the next couple of years, even that is not possible. Literally, in this projection, to keep the rate increases at about 6.5%, we really, our analysis shows there is no money to do cash financing. So we are recommending that really no cash financing be done in 2026 and 2027, so that it gives a little bit of time to build up the funding capacity so that in the future, you can do some cash financing. And so that's what you're seeing in line 8. So in 26 and 27, there is no cash financing. And then in 28 through 31, we are then saying you can do modest levels of, beginning to do modest levels of cash financing. So line 6, line 7, line 8 are all expenditures. So then when you take the total revenues in line 5, and then you subtract the total expenses in line 9, what we are projecting that in 2025, the current year, which is going to finish in the next couple of months, the water sewer fund is actually in a deficit. The revenues of 96.9 million are not enough to cover the expense projections of 99 million. So we'll talk about then how do you manage that? How can you have a deficit? So we'll talk about that in the next slide. But that's what the projection is at this point in time with just 2 months to go in fiscal 25. In fiscal 26, if the 6.5% and the 6% rate increases are approved, then that will generate a revenue of 101 million, but the expenses are 103 million. So even that is still not enough to meet the $103 million expense. So if you're wondering why are you then recommending something that is going to create a deficit, again, we'll tell you in the next slide, because again, to keep the rate increases to the minimum possible so that, we can draw any available fund balances. So that will leave 2.2 million in the previous slide, please. Can you please? Yeah, so 2.2 million. And then when you continue the series of revenue increases in the out years from 27 through 31, finally, the revenues will slowly start being enough to meet the revenue requirements. Not only enough, then it starts beginning to give a minimum small balance, positive balance, as you see in line 10. So that's what we are really presenting here. So now how do we deal with the 2.1 million and 2.2 million deficit that we are seeing in 25 and 26? Now if you go to the next slide please. So the beginning year balance, because the water sewer fund has to have the 17% reserve, that's by the ordinance requirement, at the beginning of 2025, we have 12.8 million in that operating reserve. However, when we take the current revenues and pay off all the expenditures, we are coming up with a 2.1 million deficit. So that 2.1 million deficit is taken from the 12.8 balance. So that leaves 10.7 at the end of the year. But the 10.7, we can leave it at 10.7 because that 10.7 does not meet the 17% operations and maintenance reserve requirement by the council ordinance. So therefore, you have to meet that 17%. So therefore, what we are recommending is that 3.1 million be drawn from the rate stabilization reserve and put into the operating reserve so that you can meet that and the water sewer fund is not in violation of the council ordinance. So that brings a 13.7, which is really what the water sewer fund has to have at the end of 2025. So we already said there's only 5.9 million in the rate stabilization reserve at the beginning of fiscal 25. At the end of 25, we are drawing another 3.1, and that's going to further reduce the rate stabilization reserve. The next year, because in 2026 we are only recommending a 6.5% water sewer increase and a 6% stormwater, that still leaves a $2.2 million deficit. The current revenues, as I showed in the previous slide, is not enough to meet the operating expenditures, so there's a $2.2 million. Now that $2.2 million, again, has to come from the operating balance. So from the $13.7 million, which we carry from 25 into 26, that in line 1, from there the $2.2 million deficit is addressed. So that leaves that year's operating balance at 11.5. That is again not enough to meet the 17%, because that year in 2026, the operating reserve balance that the water sewer fund should have to meet the 17% is 14.1 million. So therefore, 2.7 million we have to draw from the rate stabilization reserve. And so after that, there's really nothing to draw from the rate stabilization reserve, which we will show you shortly. So therefore, then if you continue that pattern, literally finally what we are doing, starting in 2027, we are really beginning to put some money back into the rate stabilization reserve, which you really have to, because otherwise you're going to leave the rate stabilization reserve with nothing in it. So, and which is not good for future rate increases, or if there's any other major emergency that comes along the way, then the water sewer fund will not be able to really handle it. Because there's only two reserves, the operating reserve and the rate stabilization reserve. There is no debt reserve or anything in the city. So that's really what we are showing in this projection, so that you can finally slowly build back the rate stabilization reserve and meet all the obligations. Next slide, please. Next. So now you see what happens to the rate stabilization reserve. In this plan, we are starting at the beginning of 25 with 5.9 million. We are withdrawing 3.1 million to meet the address the deficit. So that leaves only 2.9 million. In 2026, even with the 6.5% and 6% rate increase, we have to draw another 2.7 million from the rate stabilization reserve. That literally leaves the rate stabilization reserve with 200,000. I mean, literally nothing. At one point, the rate stabilization reserve had $14 million. So over a period of time, it's been drawn down. So now it will be left only with 200,000, but we are still saying, given the rate pressure and the economic conditions, what we are recommending is at least if we can have a 6.5% increase in water sewer and a 6% increase in stormwater, even though we have to draw this from the rate stabilization reserve, the idea is that if you continue to have a series of rate increases in the out years, then the rate stabilization reserve can gradually build back over a period of 5 years back to 6.8 million. Because again, we recognize that you can build back the rate stabilization reserve all in one go, because to do that, that would require a substantial rate increase. So what we are recommending is at least a phased, focused build-up of the rate stabilization reserve, so that by 2031, we can at least build it back to $7 million. So that's really what we are talking about. So then at the end of 2031, you will have $7 million in the rate stabilization reserve, and then you'll also have the 17% in the operating reserve that needs to be maintained. So that's really what we are recommending. So what does this mean in terms of achieving the metrics? Next slide, please. So with this plan, every year the water sewer fund will meet the 17% because that is required. It meets the 17% operating reserve balance. In year 2026 and 2026, for example, typically when you take the revenues that comes in a particular year in 25, you subtract the O&M, operations and expenditures of that year, the remaining money should be equal to pay the debt. Here, that is not the case. Once you pay off the O&M, the money is not enough even to pay the debt. That's why the debt should be an absolute at least 1.2. In 2025, the current revenues are not enough to pay the O&M and the debt, so therefore it's only showing up at 0.9. That's all you have. So, but then the next year, if you have, so this is even with the 6.5% increase. So, but we are saying that's okay because you can draw from the rate stabilization reserve and still pay the debt. It's not like the city is going to be in default on the debt. And then in 2027, we are trying to build back with a plan so that you at least have the debt coverage of at least 1, but really it should be at least 1.2. So we are building slowly to that 1.2. And then you can see the cash finance capital. I mean, this is really a tough one that to recommend not to have any cash financing. We typically don't like to do that. But again, recognizing the pressure on the rates, we are saying it's okay to not have a cash financing in 26, 27, but the utility really needs to have the level of rate increases needed so that you can at least start doing some modest amount of cash financing so that you can get to at least 10% to 12% of cash financing by the time you come to the end of the study period. So the key takeaway here is that it is not just focusing on 2026. While that is the focus for in terms of the decision making, we have to take a longer look for the resilience of the water sewer utility, not only just focus on 26, but also look at what is needed from 27 through the 31 timeframe. And the other takeaway is that if difficult decisions are not made for rate increases in 2026, then it's going to further exacerbate and create a problem for the water sewer fund in terms of fiscal capacity in 27 through 31. Things will get only worse. So that's really what we are finding in this objective financial analysis. Next slide, please. So to even get this financial plan, as you saw, we have literally drawn down the rate stabilization reserve. That's the only reserve we could draw down from. We have done that. And then really the city we are assuming a lot of state revolving fund loan that Ms. Jart showed in the pie chart. That is all subject to state revolving fund being available. That money partly is dependent on the federal funding. And so in this current environment, there is a little bit of uncertainty as to what funding will really be available, but yet for this plan, because of the city's historical success in really getting a lot of state revolving fund, low interest loan, to the extent possible getting principal forgiveness, we are assuming to the extent that funding is available that the city will continue to be competitive and leverage that. So that is a second strategy we have used in this. And then again, to release the rate pressure in the immediate 2 years, we have kind of recommended not doing cash financing, but really doing the bond financing, which means the city really needs to go to the bond market. The city has not gone to the bond market for the water sewer fund in the last few years, so which means in fiscal year 2026, we are really assuming that the city is going to go to the bond market based on the discussions we've had with finance and the finance department. And lastly, as I said, we have kind of drawn down whatever was feasible from the rate stabilization reserve, even though that is really not our preferred approach. We have taken the bitter pill and we have done that so that, again, to mitigate the rate increase as much as possible. Next slide, please. So now we talked about the financial plan and the series of projected increases. The logical question is, okay, this is what we are facing in Wilmington. What are our neighbors facing? Are they facing something similar? What are they proposing? Or are we the only ones proposing some rate increases? So that's what we're going to share some information with you on that. And I'm going to turn it over back to my colleague, Rupa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabha. So we wanted to present the Wilmington's proposed rate increases in the context of what the neighboring utilities are doing. And as you can see in the table that's shown on the screen, these are some of the investor-owned and public utilities that are within close driving range to Wilmington. So they're our neighbors. And Artesian Water, Veolia Water, they've both proposed rate increases of 12.4%, 44%. Tidewater, Delaware, which is a provider in Kent and Sussex counties, is proposing a 25.6% rate increase. Philadelphia, which is a short drive away, 30 minutes, they have proposed a 12.3% rate increase for water, 8.44% for sewer and stormwater, and the combined rate increase of 10% for fiscal year 2026. And then Baltimore, Maryland, we are just showing here the 2026 proposed rate increases, but they have done a series of 3 or 4 rate increases that are proposed over the next 27 and 28 of roughly 8 to 9%. So it just gives a context that utility costs are going up for all utilities, and they all need these revenue adjustments to manage those utilities and make sure the capital program and the O&M is fully funded. Next slide, please. So this is a bigger range of utilities. This is a typical or average monthly bill for the water, sewer, and stormwater for neighboring utilities in Delaware and Pennsylvania and Maryland. And we wanted to show an apples-to-apples comparison. So these are residential bills for a 5/8 inch meter size for a customer who typically uses 4,000 gallons of water. So that's the typical consumption for Inside City in Wilmington. And as you can see, the Inside City Wilmington rates are still, or Wilmington bills are still in the lower side of the overall chart. And Wilmington outside bills, Wilmington is a provider on some of the county customers, those are in the middle range. So it's slightly higher than Veolia's proposed rates, which we talked about earlier, but a little bit lower than Philadelphia's proposed rates. So overall, this chart presents that Wilmington inside rates are still on the lower end, even with these proposed rate increases. Next slide, please. So this slide presents the impact, the monthly bill impact for a customer. And on the left side, we have the Inside City customers, water, sewer, and stormwater monthly bills under the existing fiscal year 2025 rates. So the total bill for water, sewer, stormwater for a customer that uses 4,000 gallons of water is $72. Under the proposed fiscal year 2026 rates, water sewer rates proposed going up by 6.5% and stormwater rates going up by 6%. The total bill for a same customer will be about $76.80. So it's a $4.67 impact for the customer. And for the outside city customers, the outside city sewer is provided by Newcastle County. For the water rates are the only rates that are we are showing as going up here. That is about, current bill is about $87, and their bill will go up by $4 to $91, a 4.6% increase. So any bill impact is a bill impact. We recognize that, but some things are necessary as well. So this graphic presents the distribution of what each dollar or of the ratepayers' bill represent. And as we mentioned earlier, the O&M cost is the biggest component of the revenue requirements, and is almost 70 cents on the dollar, or 70% of the cost is just for O&M. So if the water fund did no capital program at all, just left everything as is, just to run the plants, just to distribute the water, just to pump the water to the customers, 70 cents on the dollar is utilized for that, just to run this utility. The capital program is about 20% or 20 cents on the dollar. And as Ms. Kumar mentioned, we are not accounting for any cash financing of capital. So there is no equity that is being added to the system in that sense. So that's $0. And the remaining 12 cents, so we talked about the O&M reserve and the rate stabilization reserve, that's about 12% or 12 cents on the dollar. Next slide, please. So this slide presents the typical other utility costs and compares that with the typical cost of a water sewer utility for a typical household in Wilmington. And the cost of a very high quality Wilmington tap water is about 1 cent per gallon. So if we compare that with bottled water, bottled water is almost 150 times more expensive. And if we look at the average daily cost of drinking water for a typical household, it's about $1.36. Average daily cost of disposing wastewater is about $1.20. So for roughly $2.50 a day, a customer is able to utilize water and dispose wastewater for all of their routine household activities, including irrigation in the summer months. So it just gives a sense of, the importance of water, yet how affordable water still is in the city of Wilmington. Next slide, please. So as we talked, starting from Commissioner Kelly Williams and Director Crisso and Ms. Kumar, the Public Works and the Water Sewer Fund is continuously focused on managing its costs and revenues, developing using the industry best practices of developing a 6-year financial plan, using the costs and revenues to manage the system infrastructure. And the end game for all of this is to provide reliable and safe services for the public. Public has come to depend on when you turn on the tap, the water comes out. When you flush, the water goes away. So it is a very important utility. It's a very valuable utility. It affects customers everywhere. So as we say, resiliency is a continuous effort, and hopefully with everyone's support, we can continue to be a resilient utility. Next slide, please. I think, Chris, you can talk to Director Chris.
Yeah, we just kind of wanted to show some resources for the council and as well as your constituents. This past year, we developed a new water utility website. It's wilmingtondewater.gov, and there's a lot of different kind of resources on there to describe a bill, to ask questions about lead, to learn about PFAS. And so we encourage everyone to kind of visit our new site to educate themselves, and there's a lot of great information my staff has been working on, and if anybody has any questions, there's contact information for our staff there if there's anything that needs to be kind of, elaborated on.
Okay, all right. So this concludes your presentation, correct? Okay, and we want to thank you everyone, for taking the time and walking us through each one of these charts. So at this time, I'm going to put the questions out on the floor to the council members and then to the public. Ms. Bass-Knight, and then Councilmember McCoy, and then Councilmember Willard.
Thank you, Chair. This is just more so a clarification question and more a process question. It'd be more so for Mr. Taylor, for the Finance Director, for Mr. Director Taylor. For the rate stabilization reserve as well as the O&M reserve, do those require approval by council to access those funds the way the ordinance is set?
The O&M reserve does require...
Can you talk into the mic? I'm sorry, so they can hear you.
The O&M reserve does require city council approval. I believe that the RSR does as well. I'll have to take a look at the legislation.
Okay, so then, so going forward, that'll be we'll just have it to be part of the ordinance, because it looks like it's, we have used both of those. I don't recall it coming before council. It's just more so a process question, so that as we're doing the ordinance.
It's a process question in terms of the accounting. So what happens is at the end of each year, you net out the fund balance as a result of you spend down, you have a revenue minus your expenditures, you take a percentage of the O&M. And at the end of the day, that's what comes up with the reserve.
Right. So, so just for clarity, I understand that, but I'm just saying as far as it coming to the council, as far as if we use any of those, if we use some of the, the rate tax stabilization reserve, if I'm calling it right, as well as the O&M, because they do change.
They do change,
Okay.
But what you have to do is you have to, prior to the budget ordinance, you have to state whether or not you're going to use the rate stabilization reserve to make your budget balance.
Okay. So just
That's
for the
when
record,
the city council would use that. Now, mid-year, if there was if there was a circumstance where you had to use the O&M reserve and then dip into the into the rate stabilization reserve, you'd have to come back to council.
Okay.
But I will get the ordinance and we can take a look at that.
Yeah, I have it here. I just don't recall it coming before the council in order for us to ask, in order, if we're drawing from it and if we're using down on it. And just one other clarifying question too is, when it does come to the O&M reserve, is that set aside like by the treasurer, no different than what we do for the general fund? So we see that like on our treasurer's report, the amount of funds that are set aside is likewise done for the O&M. I don't see it listed on the treasury report, but it doesn't mean that it's not there versus the general fund.
I do not believe they restrict that, the water sewer fund O&M reserve. I know they do restrict the budget reserve.
Okay.
The general fund budget reserve.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Councilmember McCoy.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Basnight, because that did answer like a question of mine. Because I do still have another question about whether or not the O&M reserve, has it ever been at the 17%? Oh, so it has.
Yeah.
And so the question that she managed to get answered for me is because I thought maybe once it was there, it was like static, it didn't move, but I didn't realize we were actually taking from it.
So just to explain that, yes, the O&M reserve is always at 17% because it's required. But what we are showing is that to meet the requirement, yes, there is, it is really more a mathematical effect that we are showing.
Mm-hmm.
It is not like really you're drawing from the, it's not like you're really drawing from the O&M reserve. You're really drawing from the rate stabilization reserve and putting money back so that the O&M reserve is always 17%. So if that makes sense. What we are showing is that when you take the current revenues and then when you subtract the expenses, if it is equal, if the revenues are equal to expenses, then your O&M reserve 17% stays like that, right? But when your revenues are less than the expenses, then you're coming up with a deficit. So in effect, the deficit has to be met from somewhere. Right now, what we are showing, it is actually met from the rate stabilization reserve so that you can then protect the O&M reserve of 17%. So the O&M reserve is always stable at 17%. It is really the rate stabilization reserve that is getting drawn down.
Okay, may I follow?
Follow up.
All right, so that's what I was actually thinking. That's why I was wondering why, how was it at, if it ever was at 17%, how is it fluctuating if we're only taking funds from the rate stabilization? That's where my confusion came from. But I did have another question. Hold on, did we touch it? All right, and so then it was the other question was actually asking about the deficit that you had spoke of, that we are actually going to be, that we're all going to be at the end of this fiscal year. So I'm asking whether or not, why we'll be at a deficit. Is it because of what exactly is we're actually the revenues that we're bringing in for fiscal year 2025, or is it because we have to move different? There's quite a few steps that actually come when it comes to the revenue, and so is it just the amount that's coming in that's too small, or all of the different places that we have to move this money and then figure out where we're at?
So there are actually multiple factors as to why, from our perspective, I'm sure Finance Director may have additional response as well. So number one, last year, when we did the financial plan, when we came to the council, when we did the financial plan for fiscal 25, when we came for authorization, we had actually said, based on the projections at that time, for fiscal 25, all the operating expenses and the debt service expenses, we had actually sought or recommended 8% rate increase, I think a 9% rate increase for the water sewer and a 6% for stormwater. Had that been approved, that would have brought in the right level of revenues needed to meet the expenditures. What we found at the end of last fiscal year was that that's not the level of rate increases that were approved. The rate increases were, while the request was 9%, the rate increase approved was only 5.8% for water and 4% for stormwater instead of 6%. So the moment that kind of a rate increase was approved, right there, it reduced the revenues that needed to come in. So when we had projected a level of expenditures for which a 9% and a 6% was needed, when the rate increases were set lower, that automatically reduced the revenues that are coming in, but the expenditures are still what was projected. So that was factor number one. Factor number two, which we are seeing at this point in time, I think this is happening not only in Wilmington, we are seeing it in other parts of the Mid-Atlantic and Philadelphia and even as far south as North Carolina. In fiscal 25, the consumption, generally speaking, is coming down. Probably because if there was enough rain that was happening in fall and summer of 2024, which is really the fall of 2024, that is part of fiscal 25, right? If there was a lot of rain, then that takes care of even whatever little irrigation that may happen. Not every property has irrigation, but the properties that do have irrigation, that stops. So then their consumption goes down. If the consumption goes down, that's a direct hit on revenues for the water sewer utility. So that's a second factor that we are seeing. And then the third factor really is that in fiscal 25, last time we are projecting at a point in time. So at that time we thought the water sewer fund for the operations and maintenance cost, that they may come slightly lower than the budget. But now looking at 10 months into the fiscal year, we are finding that they are going to hit 100% of the budget. At least that's what the indication is based on what they are seeing as year-to-date costs. So we had thought they may come slightly lower. So all these three factors, but the main factor being the rates were not even set the way it needed to be set. All of these three factors together are creating this 2.2 million shortfall that we are seeing.
I have one more, but I didn't know whether or not you wanted to go.
Oh, did you ask two already?
Yeah, well, one and a follow two. I'm not certain.
Go ahead.
Well, actually, the last one
Go
is
ahead.
just very simple.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was just a quick question. Wanted to find out whether or not were there any type of adjustments in the charge or in the number of gallons of water. So we already. This is basically maybe you and maybe Mr. Taylor's type of question, but I wanted to find out whether or not the unit of water that we receive and the amount that we're charged, has there been any adjustments? So because I kind of heard it on the wind that it may happen, I just want to be certain that we're clear. Like when I say unit of water, like the 2,000 gallons is cost this much more. I just wanted to see whether or not there was any adjustments in the unit of water that we receive and then also that charge for that unit of water.
No, so the rate is set per 1,000 gallons, which is how Wilmington has always had. And so even in this study, we are assuming the rate is per 1,000 gallons.
4,000?
And then the allowance, I think what you're referring to, Council Member, I think is the allowance that a customer gets in the fixed charge, which is the 2,000 gallons for residential customers up to 1-inch meter and 3,000 gallons for non-residential customers. Those allowances are still the same. We haven't made any changes to any of those assumptions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Willard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just had, I had one question. After that, I had a comment and a few more questions, if that's going to be okay.
A comment, and if you can ask your two questions, and then we're going to go to another council member, and I'll come back. Your two questions and your two follow-ups.
Okay. So my question is a little bit complicated, but I'll just go ahead. So over the last 20 years, water bills have grown more than any other source of revenue the city receives. Revenue from water bills has increased more than revenue from property taxes, wage tax, net profit tax. So the number of customers has stayed basically the same, but from 2003 to 2022, water bill revenue grew by $40 million. So it tripled in 20 years. And a lot of people noticed, like we have a lot more people behind in their bills, and many of us are now paying more in a month than we were paying in a quarter. And now we're looking at a plan that would add another $32 million to water bills in just 5 years. So from 2026 to 2031, that plan proposes $32 million more dollars from like water bills. And I just don't think that's workable. Like it took 20 years for people to get the bills up, and now we're asking them, we're going to add that, like not all as much, but almost as much again in 5 years. There's already a lot of people who are stretched thin. Electricity bills, rent, it's all too high for a lot of people to afford. And we all need water, so it's not an expense that anybody can avoid. So on council, we're always asked to raise water rates as if that was the only option. But are there any other options that we need to consider? Like, how do we share, and here are my questions. I actually had 3, I was hoping maybe I could. How do we share these costs more broadly across the 600 users of the water sewer system in the county? And do we really need to use the water sewer fund through indirect costs to pay so much of, other city expenses? Like, do we really need to pay with the water sewer fund 29% of the economic development department and 24% of the law department? So are there other choices that we could make besides just raising rates to pay for the cost of delivering water to city residents and wastewater services?
May I? I'll try my best to answer the group of questions. So the first one, the 32 million increase in 5 years, just for clarity, that out of the 32 million increase, where it goes from 101 million to 137 million, $7 to $8 million is not from Wilmington retail ratepayers, that's coming from Newcastle County. So we want to.
Madam Chair, I think actually it is coming, the 32 million is coming from the ratepayers. Like, it's right here. Additional revenue from rate increases is 32 million.
So in that slide, it goes from 101 million in 2026 to 137 million. But that increase also includes the increase coming from Newcastle County. That's one thing. Part of that increase is also needed because, as Ms. Jha was explaining, in that increase, there is also $5.6 million of assistance to customers, needy customers. So that's built into that increase. So if that customer assistance is not provided, then that increase will come down by 5.6 million. So that's also an integral part of that increase. So those are 2 components that are part of that. In terms of the question on do we need to pay the indirect costs? The indirect cost is not unique to Wilmington. It is, as far as the general fund is providing support services to the water sewer fund for all the services that the water sewer fund receives, then it is an indirect cost that has to be paid. So now, to give a comparison, if you take not a city of Wilmington-like entity, if you take an entity like, let's say, DC Water, District of Columbia Water and Sewer Authority is a water and sewer authority. That water and sewer authority has its own accounting department, own finance department, own law department, own HR department. So if it is an independent water sewer authority, a public water sewer authority, they have all of those departments built in as part of their costs. But in a municipal structure like the city of Wilmington, instead of the water department having its own accounting and finance and HR and law, all of that, it is done by the city. So in a sense, there is actually economies of scale because instead of the water sewer having all of those by themselves, it is actually shared with all the other general fund departments of the city. So therefore, the indirect costs have to be shared by all the departments that benefit from the services. Now, if the water sewer utility is a completely independent authority of the city, then yeah, they will have all of their own departments. So the question is, should the water sewer fund pay for the indirect costs based on the American Water Works Association and Water Environment Federation rate setting regulations and guidelines? The water sewer fund normally should pay the indirect costs if it receives support services because it is a user fee. So the construct of a user fee is that if it is a user fee, there has to be alignment between the services and the cost. And indirect costs are costs of the utility because they receive the services, and therefore it is recovered from user fees and charges. So that's the basis. So So that's why utilities just don't decide indirect costs based on any arbitrary methodology. There's a methodology for determining indirect costs, which is what the city uses, and that's the basis for the payment to the general fund. Then the other question, council member, I may have to ask for clarification. You kind of said, how do we share these costs with others? Would you mind explaining that?
Madam Chair, Mayor?
Yes.
It's just that the bulk payment that Newcastle County pays for sewer treatment hasn't gone up like hardly nearly as much as direct costs for users. So could their number go up more and, share those costs? Because there's 600,000 of them and there's only 37,000 city customers.
So again, we have to be very, very careful when it is a user fee, because Newcastle County only sends their wastewater sewage to the Wilmington wastewater treatment plant. So any cost that can be attributed to Newcastle County has to be only costs associated with the wastewater treatment plant. Any other costs of Wilmington retail, like the water or the stormwater, cannot be attributed to Newcastle County, because that would be in violation of the construct of a user fee. So that the wastewater treatment cost, which is the 229 fund operations and maintenance costs, bulk of that is really the contract operator cost. So all of those cost components, there are 4 cost components: the operations and maintenance costs of the contract operator, the operations and maintenance costs of the water sewer department in addition to the contract operator, the debt service associated with the water sewer wastewater treatment plant, and then the 60-day reserve on the operations and maintenance costs. All of these costs are actually determined and allocated to the contract entity, which is Newcastle County. Secondly, these allocations have to absolutely follow the contract agreement that is in place between the city of Wilmington and the county, and all of these are actually spelled out. And these are not just contract terms. These contract terms came out of a detailed cost analysis that was done to determine what costs are attributable to the county. So every year, the city has to give a budget based on these contract terms and the cost allocation methodology that is defined in the contract agreement. And then at the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, Wilmington also has to do a true-up, so that if Wilmington's cost went more than what was given to the county pays the additional money back to Wilmington. In case the costs come down more than what Wilmington actually thought county needs to pay, then Wilmington has to give the money back. So there is a budget and true-up process. This again is the industry guideline for any entity that is providing wholesale service to another public entity or even a contract, even a private large user. So when there is a contract agreement based on all these analysis, that's what Wilmington has to follow, and they can only recover the cost of services provided to the county, which is wastewater treatment.
Thank you. Okay, I have a couple questions. And again, thank you for the thorough presentation and going through each slide and each topic and justifying or explaining, should I say, how these costs all come together. Under utility financial planning, you talked a little bit about how we have the 1 year, where we actually adjust our rates yearly, annually. My question to you is, do you see an advantage or a disadvantage if we did this every 3 years versus once a year?
That's truly a policy decision on the part of the city. In terms of what's happening in the industry, yes, there are lots of examples where rates are set for multiple years. So Philadelphia, for example, does not set rate for only 1 year. They set rate for at least 2 years. I personally have done this kind of work for other clients. For example, recently in Warren, Ohio, after a long time, they did a comprehensive financial study, and they were really in dire need because a lot of the revenues were not in alignment with the revenue requirements, and they had a lot of massive capital program that's coming. So because they needed that certainty to plan all of this and operate, and also when you go for funding, when there is certainty that these are the kind of increases that a utility has already planned and has been approved by the council, it also helps with the rating agencies because of that certainty. So for all those reasons, for example, Warren and Ohio, the council approved 5 rate increases based on this comprehensive study. Another example is actually just south of us, which is Harford County in Maryland. So in 2013, until 2013, they kept on increasing the rates based on CPI without really doing this comprehensive financial plan. So then in 2013, they really realized they really were facing some dire financial constraints of almost a deficit. So they actually then went through a procurement process, and we did a comprehensive financial plan study, and based on that, that council took a decision for the first time in the history of Harford County to have 5 increases all approved at one time, because they didn't ever want to be in the situation where they are facing this kind of a deficit. So they approved the rates for 16, 17, 18, and 19, and 20. And then in 2019, they started the next plan, and they also looked back to see how well these projections held up, and then they actually did another 5 years of rate increase. So 5 years is really kind of rare, but 3 years is fairly more common, where utilities do 3 years of rate increases. Again, the reasons it is done is one, for the stability, because every year people do understand when you're operating a utility, there are going to be some slight variations year to year, but on a 3-year basis, when we do this kind of a projection, then it gives certainty for going in for capital projects, certainty for contracts, certainty for rating agencies, and also it really gives certainty for the public, so that even the customers are not wondering what is the rate increase going to be next year. They know what is coming down the pike. They can also plan, rather than this year-to-year kind of variation. So those are the reasons that we typically see why municipalities try to go in for multi-year, and also the cost associated with doing this every year, right? Mm-hmm. So all these reasons, but primarily the benefits of certainty, both for the utility and for the customers, that's why this is usually looked at.
Thank you. And my next question is, what percentage of the delinquent accounts make up the shortfall? Because I did hear you mention how we're a little behind, and I know one of the reasons you mentioned is that what you recommended, we didn't go with that percentage. We went with the lower, the 5.8. But nonetheless, what percentage would you say that our delinquent accounts play into the shortfall? Because I'm not sure if that was reflected in any of these presentations. Maybe it was, and I just didn't see it.
So, that's a good question. So to answer the question, so when we sought the 9% increase last year for water sewer and 6% for stormwater, that already recognizes that the utility will never get 100% of what they bill as revenues, because there are always customers for various reasons who may be delinquent. And there is always time lag, but typically that's the norm, that utilities are not going to get that our customers going to be delinquent. So that is already reflected. So in the revenue projections that we are doing now, we have already reflected a certain level of what we call a bad debt factor for water sewer, and also a bad debt factor for stormwater. And they are not the same percentage we have, because again, looking at the historical data, working with finance department, and there's a bad debt factor already built in. So that in itself doesn't cause the direct deficit here, because we have already addressed it as a debt factor. So the bottom line is, if one set of customers are going to be delinquent, that really means some other set of customers are paying it. So it's not like because one group of customers are delinquent, the utility can be left with a shortfall. And that is why we already have to assume a certain level of delinquency. Now, from a best practice standpoint, with better enforcement on delinquent customers, assistance for delinquent customers, so it's a combination. It's not just a carrot or a stick. It's really a carrot and a stick. You have to help delinquent customers because some may really have some hardships, which is why this $5.6 million of assistance program is built in. But at the same time, it also requires enforcement, because there are customers who could pay who may not be paying if there is no enforcement. So there are some utilities that do a strong enforcement, some utilities are not that strong. There are some utilities that are very clear policies. So for example, utility north of us, Newark, New Jersey, at the end of the year, if there is delinquency for the customers of 60 days or 90 days, that delinquency is pushed into their tax lien. So there are utilities in Ohio who do that. So every utility has its own slightly different policy. But the common thing is that you have to provide assistance, but you also have to have enforcement. So that the combination of the two really helps all the customers, because if one group does not pay, then the other customers who are good paying customers are taking additional burden, and the longer the delinquency and the higher the delinquency, the rates are going to keep on increasing, because at the end of the day, the utility needs the revenue. So that's really what happens.
Thank you. And my follow-up question is this. I know that we have the Water Bill Utility Assistance Program. What other programs make up that? I think you said $5 million. What other programs?
So the 5.6 million is really made up of two. One is the 30% discount by rate ordinance that elderly citizens and differently abled citizens, the two categories of citizens get 30% discount. It's a program where the customers have to opt in, and they also, if they qualify and meet the criteria, then they get that. So that, as Ms. Jha said, just in 2025, it's about $474,000, roughly $475,000 per year. And as the rates keep increasing, that 30%, which means the revenue reduction also keeps increasing, right? As rates increase, they continue to get the 30%. And so which means the revenue reduction also keeps on increasing. Now, where will the $3.6 million that we are proposing in the 5 years come from? It comes from other ratepayers, because there's no other source of funding. Secondly, the $250,000 per year that Water Sewer Department has put in the budget for customer assistance each year, that is $1.5 million. That $1.5 million is also coming from other ratepayers. So this $5.1 million, so if this group of ratepayers are getting the assistance from that $5.1 million, other group of ratepayers are paying that $5.1 million. Unless there is some other source, like a private entity or some other source that is coming into the city from some charitable organization or some charitable foundation, there is no other source for this customer assistance. If any customer assistance that is given by the Water Sewer Fund is being made up by other ratepayers of the same Water Sewer Fund. So that's the balancing act utilities strive to have. So that is why, as difficult as it is to, as these revenues and rates go up, utilities also have to balance, because it has to have an alignment. In some states, that is actually not allowed. Michigan is one state, for example. You cannot recover the assistance you give to one group of customers from another group of customers. It's not allowed. It's not allowed by state law. So, but in Delaware, there is no explicitly stated law like that. So that's the balancing act every utility is trying to do in terms of, and plus when you have a smaller customer base, Wilmington's customer base is only, again, when you're giving water and sewer is inside the city, right? So any assistance that you give to one customer has to come from the other group of customers, but there's only that base.
Yeah.
It's not like the base is large enough to take on a large assistance program. So that's the other issue you have.
I knew the answer, but I wanted it to be on record as it relates to the assistance that the city of Wilmington is providing for different demographics, and I knew that you could explain it a lot better than me. So thank you very much for that. So I'm going to put it back out to the council members for any other questions.
Madam Chair, I have one question.
Councilmember Willard.
And this is a direct question for finance. How many dedicated staff does the finance department have for the water utility that don't work on anything but water sewer fund activities?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but it is in the budget book. In the budget binder, each of our staff members is listed with the amount of their distribution between the general fund and the water sewer fund. So that's easily researchable.
It's also, if you wouldn't mind, Councilman.
Yes.
Council
Yes,
Chair,
please.
it is also in the budget ordinance in the position allocation list.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Okay. I want to put it out to the public. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak? No? Okay. And any final questions from the council members? Ms. Bass Knight?
Yes, just more of a question, more so for the budget office. So just from looking at the fiscal year 2025 third quarter water revenue projection, so it looked like in total we can come in at roughly 95.9 million. I'm just like looking at this and I'm comparing it to fiscal year 2025 for the total revenues. Like, is there like a difference between the projection and what's on the plan for here? So I'll just look at the numbers for the meeting for tomorrow, just comparing the two.
Yeah, so
Okay.
tomorrow we will go in detail, but again, we get into the same discussion about the revenues being projected at WEFAC are on an accrual basis
Okay.
and not a cash basis.
Okay.
But we will explain that tomorrow.
All right, thank you.
Any other council members? Director Taylor, what is the balance of our delinquent accounts? Roughly.
For the water sewer fund, it's about, as of the end of 2024, it was $19 million.
19 million? Thank you. Okay, all right. Councilmember Bracy?
Director Taylor, just a follow-up to that. Of that 19 million that's delinquent, realistically, how much do you think Finance Department would actually be able to recover? Or is this a situation where we'll eventually write some of this off?
As a matter of accounting policy, we write down 10% a year for every year an account remains delinquent. So if you have $100 owed, next year we'll write off 10% of that, and that $90 will remain on our accounts receivable. So in any given year, it could be, we do have accounts that are almost 10 years old, and we've written down almost 90% of that. That's a rolling average. So every year we get new delinquencies, and it continues to prop that up. We bring in approximately $20 to $22 million a year just on collections. That's not regular bills coming in. That is us going out and actually collecting the money through, just through water disconnection notices, sheriff's sale notices, settlements that we do, people just calling in, asking for settlements on their delinquencies. I can give you a breakout of the general fund and water sewer fund distribution of that. I'd say the majority of it is water sewer. As of right now, the distribution between residential customers and what they owe of that 19 million is 13 million. The remainder is commercial, industrial, and apartments, and that is approximately 6 million. So the majority of it, and by count, it's about a 4-to-1 ratio. By financially, it's about a 2-to-1 ratio. So, the majority of it is residential customers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember McCoy, do you have your hand up? I couldn't tell.
Nah. Because I could go down that way.
Okay, Councilmember Willard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Taylor, I just had a quick question. That, let's just say 10 million a year that comes in collections, where does it end up? Like, does it end up as revenue? Like, where does it get accounted for?
It gets placed directly into the water sewer revenue fund. It's counted as part of
the 96 or whatever,
96,
94?
yeah.
Thank you very much. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right. Okay. So thank you, council members, for your questions. And I would like to thank Mr. Jones, OMB Fiscal and Operational Analyst, Black and Veatch, Commissioner Williams and her team for presenting this evening. And again, I want to remind everyone, if you have any follow-up information that you need to share or to receive, I ask that you please reach out to Ms. Bassnight. And I also want to thank our OMB Director, Mr. Greco, and team, our department heads, WITN, our council staff, members of the public, and Ms. English for assisting us on this evening. I also want to thank all my fellow council colleagues for participating in this budget hearing during this entire month of April. Our next council will start to have budget negotiations and final budget wrap-ups with the administration regarding the fiscal year 2026 budget. Our next Finance Committee meeting is scheduled for Monday, May the 12th at 5:00 p.m., which will have all the budget ordinances pertaining to the fiscal year 2026 budget that is tentatively slated for the third and final vote by council on Thursday, May the 15th. I want to encourage the public and the community to continue to please tune in to WITN Channel 22 to watch the meetings, as well as watching it online at www.witn22.org. And also we have our budget information, which is available at www.wimdbudget.org. And so having said that, we want to thank everyone for your participation, for coming out, for the questions, for the answers. And we know that this is a time where we really have to ask the hard questions to decide on how we want to vote on the budget. So we do appreciate each and every one of you. And having said that, I would like to accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, and thank you again, everyone, and have a great night. Thank you.